Moana. Once I saw Olivia leave through the coffee shop window, I waited 5 minutes before leaving myself and walking in the opposite direction. We had planned to leave separately like this, just in case anyone was waiting for me outside. At the very least, I could make up a convincing story that Olivia and I didn't recognize each other at all, and it was likely that no one would ask too many questions. As I walked, I couldn't stop thinking about everything she had just told me. It felt as though the entire world that I had come to know over the past few months had been completely turned upside down, and I didn't know what to do. If it was true that I was the golden wolf, then that meant that I was already in enough danger of being hunted as it was. Not only that, but if Edric already knew that I was the golden wolf, then he was deliberately keeping it from me. And, judging from everything that I had learned recently, I knew why he was keeping it from me. However, I still had no way of knowing for sure. I hardly knew Olivia, and although she seemed genuine, I still didn't know for sure if I could completely trust her. I decided that before I would jump to any rash conclusions, I would have to do some digging of my own. Until I did that, though, at least my wolf had regained some of her energy, and I could talk to her now. "What did you think about all of that?" I asked my wolf as I walked down the sunny street toward the penthouse. "What about the part where she said that he might be lying about being my mate?" "I'm not sure yet," Mina replied. She still sounded a little sleepy, but she was lucid at least. "I think I'm still a little too foggy from the potions to be able to think clearly. I need a little more time." I bit my lip as I walked, thinking that there was a good possibility that we didn't even have time. However, if Edric really was planning on producing a child of the golden wolf, then at least there was a good chance that I would be somewhat safe until the baby was born. But then again, I still had no way of knowing. I couldn't read Edric's mind, or anyone else's for that matter. And although part of me felt silly for thinking that Edric would ever want to hurt me, I couldn't help but wonder if the kind, sweet part of Edric was just an act. Maybe he really was just like his father after all. Suddenly, as I turned a corner, I saw a familiar car speeding up to me. My eyes widened as I saw it come to a screeching halt in front of me, blocking me from crossing the street. The window rolled down and Edric was sitting in the driver's seat. "Get in," he said, sounding stern and aggravated. Swallowing, I hesitantly got into the car. Did he know that I met up with Olivia? What was he going to do if that was the case? However, as he pulled the car around and began to drive again in the direction of the penthouse, it seemed as though he was angry for a different reason. "You didn't bring the driver or a bodyguard," he said. His voice was low, so low it almost sounded like a growl. "You know how dangerous it is, don't you? Why didn't you listen to me, Moana?" "It's just a few blocks away," I said, feeling my face getting hot with a combination of fear and embarrassment. "I don't see the issue," Edric scoffed. "You really don't see the issue? You put yourself and our baby's safety at risk, Moana. Why couldn't you just have the driver take you?" "Because I just wanted to feel normal," I lied, folding my arms across my chest. "I was only meeting up with a friend for coffee, and besides, I wore the surgical mask like you told me to. I dressed discreetly, and I wore my hat to cover my hair. No one recognized me, and it was fine. You worry about me too much." With a shake of his head, Edric came to a hard stop at a red light. When I looked over, I could see that his hands were wrapped so tightly around the steering wheel that his knuckles were white, and he was clenching and unclenching his jaw repeatedly. "You don't understand how dangerous the city is," he muttered as he waited for the light to turn green again. Now, I was the one who scoffed incredulously. "Seriously?" I asked with a bit of a wry chuckle. "I'm the one who doesn't understand how dangerous the city is? I grew up here, Edric. I didn't live in a fancy palace outside of the city like you did, without a real care in the world. I'm the one who has spent her whole life living here, so I think I know the city a little bit better than someone who was raised in the lap of luxury like you." Edric opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I instantly felt a little guilty for the nasty things that I said, and as the light turned green and Edric began driving again, I wondered if I should apologize. But then again, I reminded myself that Edric was up to something, and aside from that, He still hadn't even properly apologized for the nasty things that he said when we argued the other night. When we pulled up to the penthouse, I immediately unclicked my seatbelt and went to open the door. But when I pulled on the handle, it was locked, and I froze. "I need you to listen to me from now on," Edric said, his voice low and quiet as he spoke through his teeth. "And furthermore, I'm not letting you go anywhere without me anymore. I'm tired of having to be scared half to death that you'll get yourself hurt or killed whenever you go out for coffee." I ground my teeth together, unsure of how to respond, but it didn't matter anyway, because the lock clicked open. I swung the door open and climbed out, slamming it behind me before I stormed inside. I didn't even wait for Edric to park the car before I got onto the elevator and headed upstairs. And the entire way up, I couldn't help but wonder if I should take Olivia's advice after all. What Edric said was just more proof in my eyes that he saw me as an expensive object that needed to be tucked away neatly into a glass cabinet where no one else could get to me. I didn't feel as though I was a person to him, but rather a commodity. And when our baby was born, would he discard me once he had what he wanted? Would he send me away like he did with Olivia? Would he sell me to bounty hunters who wanted the golden wolf? Or would he kill me, just like his father killed Ethan's mother? The more I thought about this, the more appealing the idea of running away and returning little Ella to her real mother became. Edric. When Moana told me that she was going out to have coffee with a friend, I was happy for her. In fact, so long as she stayed safe, I encouraged it. I knew how much stress she had been under over the past few months, so it would have been good for her to see a friend for a couple of hours. However, when my driver called me and asked what was taking Moana so long to come down, I started to feel confused. "What do you mean?" I asked. "She left half an hour ago." "I haven't seen her," the driver replied. "I've been sitting right out front the whole time." I furrowed my brow and stood. Before I jumped to any conclusions, I decided to check both bedrooms to see if she wasn't feeling well and decided not to leave, and maybe I just didn't notice her coming back in. However, she wasn't there. By then, I was pretty certain that I knew what she had done. She had gone without the driver. Cursing under my breath, I grabbed my keys and ran downstairs. Since the driver hadn't seen her at all, due to her hiding herself for some reason, I had no way of knowing which direction she even went in. But if she had left on foot, then I was certain that she couldn't have gone too far. So, climbing into my car, I sped off to check all of the nearby coffee shops for her. I searched for her for about an hour, running into all of the local coffee shops to see if she was there. Unfortunately, she wasn't in any of them. By now, I was starting to feel panicked. This was too soon after what Kelly had done to her by having her get kidnapped by rogues, and I became worried that something else had happened to her. As I drove, I eventually pulled out my phone and debated calling the police to look for her. But thankfully, I spotted a head of red hair walking down the street before I made the phone call. I came to a screeching halt and told her to get in the car. Moana seemed to be in a bit of a mood, and almost immediately snapped at me when I told her that she had done something very dangerous by going out by herself with no protection, especially on foot. Why couldn't she understand that it wasn't safe for her to be walking around by herself when she had only just gotten over the incident with Kelly? And the paparazzi were still on the lookout for her? Part of me almost wanted to tell her that she was the golden wolf, and that she needed to be kept safe, or else there was a chance that she could be kidnapped or hunted. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. If she knew too soon, then it could speed up her progress with her wolf emerging, and I needed her to wait to shift until the baby was born for a multitude of reasons. Although, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer I could let this go on without telling her. Especially when she climbed out of the car and slammed the door behind her. I thought to myself that she would grow more and more impatient with me over time. With a sigh, I watched Moana disappear into the building before I parked the car and headed inside. She didn't wait for me, not that I expected her to, and by the time I made my way back up to the penthouse, she was nowhere to be seen. Did Moana come through here?" I asked Selena, who was baking a pie while the two maids were deep cleaning the kitchen. She ran past just a minute ago, Amy blurted out as she scrubbed the inside of a cupboard. She seemed mad. Yeah, that Lily chimed in before I could respond. She slammed her bedroom door. Did you two have a fight? Lily, Selena hissed. It's none of your business. I sighed and shook my head, then walked over to one of the stools at the counter island and sat down. It's all right, I said, passing my hand over my face. I think she's just dealing with some hormones. The maids fell silent. I realized then that I had revealed more than I really meant to. Lately, I had been becoming noticeably more open with the servants. I had always been a bit closer with Selena since I had known her for a long time, but I rarely chatted with Amy and Lily. However, ever since Moana moved in, I had found myself talking with them more often. It was a stark enough difference that even I noticed, and sometimes surprised myself with my candidness. Even just thinking about it made me smirk. Moana had had such a positive impact on me that I was even beginning to change my opinions on how servants should be treated. I just wished that she could see that instead of always getting so aggravated with me. Although, after the way that I snapped at her the other night, I supposed that I deserved it. Selena pushed a fresh, steaming cup of tea across the counter toward me and gave me a knowing look. I could tell that she didn't believe that it was hormones one bit, and she was right. I'll talk to her later, she said, returning to decorating the top of the pie. Just give her some space today. Not just today, but every day. She is an adult, and she's capable of taking care of herself. I felt myself tense up a bit at Selena's words. Of course she was right, but at the same time, I just felt too protective over Moana. Maybe that protectiveness would only push her away, though. I did wind up leaving Moana alone for the rest of the day. She didn't come out of her room very much, except to check on Ella, and didn't even look at me when I passed by. Even though I wanted to ask her what her problem was, and part of me even wanted to grill her on who she had coffee with, as though something about whoever she saw would explain her secretiveness and poor attitude, I decided to take Selena's advice and just gave Moana her space. However, Moana didn't wind up coming to my room that night. I waited for a few hours, but she never came. Finally, unable to sleep without her, I decided to go over to her room and see if she was still awake. But when I went to open the door to climb into bed with her, the door was firmly locked, and she didn't answer my knocks. With a sigh, I resigned myself to staying up all night study. I wouldn't be able to sleep without my pills, and I had already made a personal decision to not fall back into the pit of drinking copious amounts of alcohol to make myself sleep. After all, sleep wouldn't come for me without Moana by my side. Moana. I went to work the next morning with my meeting with Olivia still plaguing my mind. Between all of the evidence I had gathered so far, what Olivia said and how Edric reacted when he discovered that I hadn't taken the driver, I was seriously beginning to doubt my own safety at home. That morning, I sneakily dumped my morning coffee again. By the time I got to work, my wolf's energy was back to normal and she was able to offer me some insight on the situation. I am almost entirely certain that Edric is indeed our mate, Mina said during my lunch break, while I paced back and forth in my empty classroom and chewed nervously on my fingernails. But that doesn't mean that his intentions are entirely pure, does it? I asked. Mina was silent for a few moments before responding. No, it doesn't. I cursed under my breath, thinking hard. I didn't know much about the inner world of werewolves, but I had always been under the impression that fated mates would never want to betray each other. Then again, however, I couldn't help but think back to the story of how Ethan was born. Michael and Verona were supposed to be fated mates, but Michael cheated on her anyway and betrayed her trust. It sounded as though there was more emotional abuse going on as well, but I didn't know for sure. Either way, Michael had betrayed Verona despite the fact that they were mates. Was it possible that something ran in that family that made the men untrustworthy? I hated to believe it, especially after how kind Edric had been. But then again, he had just told me that he would never marry me. And although he seemed to have tried to make up for it the next day by spending the day with me, he had still not apologized, which made me think now that his nasty side was his true nature. Not only that, but the way that he had locked me in the car and told me that he wouldn't let me out of his sight anymore, made me nervous, as though I was his prisoner in some way. As I paced back and forth in my classroom, I thought back to the first night that I had spent in the penthouse. After I realized that Edric was the one who hired me, I had tried to go home, but he had sent frightening men after me. Maybe I should have taken that alone as the first red flag. Even before my true nature as a werewolf was known, he wouldn't let me leave. Did he know that I was the golden wolf then, somehow? Or did he only find out later, and that just solidified his desire to keep me tucked away on a shelf? All day, I couldn't get my worries out of my mind. When I went home that evening, however, I had an idea as to how I could potentially ease my worries and find out for sure if I really was being poisoned, if I was simply being paranoid. The next morning, I woke up earlier than normal. I woke up before everyone else and snuck over to the kitchen, where I placed my phone on video mode in a cupboard. I made sure to angle it in such a way that it couldn't be seen normally, but so that the video would show a perfect shot of the coffee machine. After that, I hit record and snuck back to my room. Later, I came out of my room dressed for work as though I had just woken up, and just as I suspected, my coffee and breakfast were waiting for me on the kitchen counter. "Good morning," Selena said from where she stood by the kitchen sink. "Sleep well?" I nodded, trying to act nonchalant as I sat down and began to eat my breakfast. I made sure to only pretend to sip my coffee and waited for a moment when Selena had walked out of the room. Then I quickly dumped my coffee down the sink and ran over to the cupboard to retrieve my phone. Selena came back in just as I was sitting back down at the kitchen counter, oblivious to everything I had just done. My heart pounded as I finished eating my breakfast and got ready for work. Edric walked with Ella and I to school, and we said our goodbyes, and the entire time I felt as though I was going to explode. When I got to my classroom that morning, the very first thing I did was sit down at my desk and pull my phone out of my purse. With shaking hands, I opened it up and clicked on the video that I had taken. I scrolled through the video. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. Selena came in and ground up the coffee beans, then filled the pot with water and put the coffee grounds into the filter. She turned on the coffee machine and walked away to start cooking on the stove with her back turned to the camera. A little while later, however, Edric came in. I watched with wide eyes as he took 2 mugs out of the cupboard and poured coffee and creamer into them, one for himself and one for me. Then, while Selena's back was still turned, Edric placed my coffee cup down at my seat. My heart started to pound so hard that I felt as though it would pound straight out of my chest as I watched in horror. Edric glanced nervously over his shoulder at Selena, as though checking to make sure she wasn't looking, and then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial of liquid. He put 2 drops of the mystery liquid into my coffee, quickly concealing the vial back in his pocket, just moments before Selena turned around with the pan of scrambled eggs in her hand. And then he just walked away. I stopped the video, my hands shaking more than ever before. I clamped my hand over my mouth, feeling vomit beginning to bubble up, and suddenly stood and bolted out the classroom door. Across the hall there was a bathroom, and I ran inside and burst into one of the stalls, ignoring strange looks from 2 high school girls. The entire contents of my stomach came out into the toilet. When I was finished vomiting, I staggered back out to the sinks. The 2 high school girls were gone by now. I leaned over the sink, sobbing quietly as I splashed cold water onto my face. Now I had all of the proof that I needed. Edric Morgan, the alpha billionaire who I thought that I had been falling genuinely in love with and whose baby I was carrying in my belly, was poisoning me. I needed to not only get myself and my baby to safety, but I also needed to get little Ella to safety too. That night, I would have to return her to her mother, and then I needed to disappear. Moana. After I saw the video of Edric putting something in my coffee, I knew that I needed to get out. It both broke my heart and made me sick to think about leaving. I had been falling deeply in love with Edric, and yet this entire time it turned out that he was secretly plotting something against me. I didn't know what it was exactly that he was planning, but whatever it was certainly wasn't good. I needed to get myself and my baby out of there. and I planned on returning Ella to her rightful mother too. Even though I knew that taking Ella and returning her to her mother could land me in prison, I was willing to take risk for the sake of getting little Ella out of a household with a father who was dangerous and up to no good. That afternoon, during my lunch break, I made my escape plan. I called Olivia as soon as I could and explained everything. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath after I had told her all about the video evidence I had. "We'll get you out of there." "And Ella, too," I said. Olivia fell silent. I thought I heard her sniff, and it made me wonder if she was crying. When she responded, she didn't mention anything, but her voice was shaking. "Okay, okay." She was repeating herself like she was thinking deeply. Then, after a few more moments of silence, she seemed to have come up with something. "Here's what we'll do." After work, Edric picked Ella and I up again as usual. It pained me to see his smiling face as Ella ran up to him. He picked her up and put her on his shoulders, and as we began to walk home, he slipped his arm around me. I felt myself instantly become tense under his touch. "Are you sure we should do this?" my wolf asked, sounding unsure. "He is our mate, after all." I almost responded out loud on accident, but caught myself just in time. "Yes," I replied. "It's for the best. I'd rather be alone forever than put my baby in danger." "All right." I could tell that Mina was horribly upset, but she was understanding of the situation. It was indeed for the best. When we got home, I feigned sickness and went straight to my room. I locked my door and then spent the remainder of the afternoon planning, preparing, and packing. Olivia had told me that she booked a hotel room for me and Ella all the way across town. Once Ella and I would get there late that night, the plan was to change our clothes, wait for a couple of hours, and then leave. After we left, there would be a black car with tinted windows waiting for us that would have Olivia inside. Together, the three of us would drive to the airport. Olivia purchased 3 plane tickets to Europe. Apparently, when Olivia was first kicked out by Edric, she kept getting death threats and was being stalked by people who Edric hired. She told me that she had changed her identity, purchased a fake ID, and that the original Olivia had essentially dropped off the face of the earth. She still called Edric to check on her daughter, but she always called from different phones that would hide her number so she couldn't be tracked. Apparently, that was what was going to happen that night. I would withdraw all of my money, dump my phone and my wallet in the river on our way to the airport, and Olivia would give me a new ID. Once we were in Europe, I could convert all of my money and open a new bank account there under my new name. Of course, I was putting a lot of trust in Olivia by planning all of this. My wolf kept reminding me of that. But I felt as though I had no other choice, and it was the only way to protect myself, my baby, and Ella. Edric and his family were far too powerful and dangerous, and I was more willing to put my trust in a woman who I hardly knew at this point than to trust that Edric's intentions were good. All day, I stayed in my room. Selena tried knocking on the door a few times, but each time I either pretended to be asleep or I said that I was too sick to come out. Finally, it seemed as though they had given up. Eventually, I heard Edric putting Ella to bed in her room next door. I stayed quiet, listening through the wall. It pained me greatly to hear how sweet Ella was with Edric, knowing that this was their last time that they would see each other. I listened tearfully as he read her a bedtime story. "Good night, Daddy," Ella's tiny voice said. "I love you." "I love you too, Princess." I heard the sound of Edric's footsteps leaving the room, followed by the sound of Ella's bedroom door closing. There was a pause, and then his footsteps came over to my door. I practically held my breath as I heard him walk up to my door and pause there. He didn't move for a long time, but he didn't knock or try the door. Something about it was almost terrifying, as though he was watching me through the door. But finally, he walked away, and I didn't hear anything after that. It was hours that I waited in my room. I watched in silence as the hours ticked by, first 10 o'clock, then 11, then midnight. When 1 o'clock struck, I knew that it was time. My bag was already packed. I didn't pack much other than a few changes of clothes and some sentimental things. When I opened the door, I slowly looked around to see that the penthouse was completely dark before I quietly tiptoed over to Ella's room. While she slept, I quietly packed a bag for her. Once again, just some changes of clothes and sentimental things. My eyes were filled with tears the entire time, especially as I picked up pictures of Ella and Edric that were placed in picture frames around the room. There was one picture of all three of us taken by Selena one day while we were all playing in the living room. I had framed it a while back, thinking that I would be here forever, but now I knew that the smiling Edric in that photograph was nothing but a facade. However, I didn't want Ella to forget her father regardless of what he had done, so I tucked the photo away into her bag. Once I was finished, I gently shook Ella to wake her up. I placed my finger over my lips as soon as her eyes opened, indicating for her to stay quiet. "Moana," she whispered, yawning sleepily. "Did you have a bad dream?" "No, love," I responded. I gently pulled the covers off of her, blinking my own tears away. "You and I have to go somewhere." Ella sat up, looking confused. "Where are we going?" I sighed and tucked a strand of hair behind her little ear. "I'm going to take you to meet your real mommy," I whispered. Ella's eyes widened. I held out my hand for her, and she took it. "Moana." Ella took my outstretched hand. As I helped her get up, she rubbed her eyes sleepily and looked up at me with more confusion written across her face. "You're taking me to meet my real mommy?" she murmured. "What do you mean? My mommy is dead." "Ella," I crouched down to her level and held her by both shoulders, looking at her intensely. "I'll explain later, okay? For now, I just need you to trust me. Do you trust me?" Ella stared at me for a few moments, looking skeptical, before she finally nodded and didn't ask any more questions. I helped her get dressed quickly, then put her shoes on and grabbed both of our bags. Opening the door just a crack, I checked once more to make sure that the apartment was still quiet. It seemed as though everyone was asleep. Of course, there was still a chance that Edric was awake, so we would have to move quickly. I took Ella's hand and quickly led her across the living room and over to the foyer. Since the elevator would ding and make noise, I decided to take us downstairs through the fire exit stairs. I quietly opened the fire exit door next to the elevator and brought Ella into the dimly lit concrete stairwell with me. "Moana," she said, pausing at the top of the stairs, "why are we going down this way? I never go down this way, and it's scary in here." "I know, love," I said gently, still holding her hand. "But I'm right here with you. See?" I walked down the first couple of steps and then turned to look back up at her. She stared at me, still with that skeptical look on her face, before she shakily took the first step. It took us longer than I would have liked, but eventually we made it down to the bottom floor. I couldn't walk us through the lobby, where people would see us, although I was certain that someone would eventually see us on the cameras later, and I hoped that we would be long gone by then. So I took us instead through the back door that led to the alleyway. Once again, Ella paused reluctantly and looked up at me with confusion, but she didn't ask anything this time, and bit her lip and followed me instead. Someday, I knew that I would have to explain everything to her. I hoped that she would understand and not resent me for everything that was happening that night, but I wasn't sure. All I knew for sure was that this was for the best. Even if she hated me when she got older and never wanted to see me again, I could at least rest easy knowing that I had gotten her away from a dangerous living situation. I led Ella down the dark alleyway, checking over my shoulder the entire time before we eventually came out onto the street behind the penthouse. And just as Olivia said there would be, there was a cab waiting for us a little ways down the street. "Come on, Ella," I said quietly. She seemed to hesitate again, but freedom was so close, and so I picked her up and rushed down the street with her in one arm, my bag in my other hand, and Ella's new school backpack slung over my shoulder. "Moana, I'm scared," Ella whimpered as we ran closer to the waiting cab. As she spoke, I felt tears poking at the backs of my eyes. Involuntarily, I froze for a moment and took one last look up at the penthouse. Inside, Edric was likely laying in bed and trying to sleep, completely oblivious to the fact that I was running away and stealing his daughter. The longer I looked up at the penthouse, imagining the lonely alpha billionaire tossing and turning, the more I remembered how it felt to sleep in his arms. How it felt to wake up with him and feel the warm sun shining in through his open window. how it felt to see his smiling face when I finished the school day with Ella. But none of that mattered now, because he was going to hurt me and my baby, and no matter how much I had grown to love him over the last few months, I had to cut myself loose. My eyes began to well up with tears, but I managed to tear my gaze away from the penthouse and make my way over to the waiting cab. I opened the door and ushered the sleepy and scared Ella into the cab, then climbed in behind her and shut the door. Here, I said, handing the silent cab driver the address for the hotel that I had written down. But the cab driver didn't take it, and as she pulled away from the curb, it seemed as though she knew where we were going. It did make sense, after all. Olivia probably knew this cab driver personally. I doubted that she would have allowed any regular cab driver to take us to the hotel, as an untrusted person could have easily given mine and Ella's whereabouts to the police. The cab driver appeared to be a woman. She was thin, wearing a beanie that covered most of her hair and a blue surgical mask. As she drove, the radio played staticky music in the background that filled the silence. Behind me, Ella sniffled. She leaned into me and I wrapped my arm around her, rubbing her gently. Soon, this would be all over and she wouldn't need to be afraid anymore. At least, that was what I hoped. I could only hope that I was making the right decision. But as the cab driver took us through the glowing city, I began to get a bad feeling in my stomach. A pit of dread slowly opened as my sixth sense kicked in. Something was wrong. I didn't know what it was, but something was definitely not right. I think we're supposed to be going north, I said quietly, pointing out the window. But the cab driver wasn't taking us north. She was taking us south, in the opposite direction. The cab driver didn't answer, though. "Hello?" I said, feeling my heart beginning to quicken its pace. "I think you're going in the wrong direction." Once again, the cab driver didn't speak. We came to a stop at a red light. We were still only a few blocks away from the penthouse, and I began to wonder if I should get out here with Ella and run back home. Every fiber in my body was screaming at me to do just that. Swallowing, I reached for the door handle. But the car doors were locked. "Please let us out," I said, my voice shaking as I tried the handle over and over again. Beside me, Ella was beginning to catch on as well, and I could feel her get tense. "I want to get out now," I pleaded. Suddenly, the cab driver began to chuckle, and she pulled down her mask. It wasn't just any cab driver. It was Kelly. "Don't worry, you two," she said, turning in her seat to look at us with a twisted grin on her gaunt face. "I'm going to take you far, far away, and I'll make sure that Edric never finds you." "Moana, don't worry, you two," Kelly said as she turned around in her seat to look at us. There was a sick, twisted grin on her gaunt face. She looked even more skeletal than before, as though she hadn't eaten or slept in days, maybe even weeks. "I'm going to take you far, far away, and I'll make sure that Edric never finds you." "'Kay, Kelly?" I whimpered. I tried the car door again, but it was still locked. And it was too late now. The light turned green and Kelly hit the gas, speeding down the mostly empty street. "Didn't expect to see me, huh?" she said, laughing almost maniacally as she gripped the steering wheel tightly. Even in the dim light of the car, I could see that her knuckles were as white as a sheet. Ella, who had caught on to the danger by now, was beginning to panic. I felt her little arms slip around my waist, and when I looked down, she was looking up at me with terror in her eyes. I pulled her close, holding her tightly, and took her head and buried it in my side so she wouldn't have to see in case Kelly did anything insane. "Kelly, what is all of this?" I asked, my heart practically pounding out of my chest. "Do you know Olivia? Why are you here?" Kelly giggled, sounding almost like a child. "Oh, her?" she asked. She took a sharp turn, causing Ella and I to slide across the seat. I quickly buckled Ella into a seatbelt as I mentally prepared for Kelly to do something rash, like intentionally crash the car. "Yeah, of course I know my good friend Olivia," she continued. "If it wasn't thanks to her, I wouldn't be here right now. She's been really helpful." "Helpful with what?" I asked. "Well, you see," Kelly said, speeding through a yellow light, "you've done nothing except get in the way of my relationship with Edric. Both of you, really. First that little snot-nosed brat," she gestured over her shoulder at Ella with her thumb, "and then you with your stupid pregnancy." Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror then. They looked hollow and pale, like ghosts of what they once were. Kelly was always a bit unhinged, but now she seemed far worse. It had only been a few weeks since the incident in the Rogue District, and already she seemed like an almost entirely different person. "You never had a relationship with Edric," I growled. "He can't stand you." Suddenly, Kelly came to a screeching halt at another red light. She whipped around in her seat, her eyes shooting daggers. Her face was twisted into such an evil expression that she looked like a demon, and I covered Ella's face with my hand. "Shut the fuck up," she snarled, "before I come back there and shut you up myself." My eyes widened. I decided that it was best for me to stay quiet, as she seemed so unhinged that I wouldn't have put it past her to intentionally run the car into a building over my next comment. The light turned green again, and Kelly hit the gas once more, causing us to lurch in our seats. I heard Ella sob quietly beside me, and I pulled her closer. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I whispered into her ear. "I'm going to protect you. Mama's going to protect you." In the moment, I didn't even think twice about referring to myself as Ella's mother. In fact, now that I knew that Olivia was indeed either an actress or simply a horrible person who led us right into a trap, I felt more maternal over Ella than ever. But at the same time, I felt like a horrible mother for letting her get into this situation with me, all because of things that a stranger told me. "Anyway," Kelly said, gesturing wildly with one hand while she drove with the other, "I've figured out the perfect way to finally make Edric understand that I'm the only one for him. I know that we're meant for each other, but it's just going to take a little extra push to get him there." "If you let us go right now, you can have him," I begged. "Please, just let us go and don't hurt Elle." "So," Kelly interrupted, "here's my plan. While Edric is dealing with his grief, that's when I'll swoop in. I actually learned a little lesson from you, believe it or not, and that's that I can lock him down by getting pregnant. I don't even care if it's his baby, honestly. If I need to get pregnant before I ever even sleep with him, then so be it. It doesn't matter whose baby it is, so long as he thinks that it's his. Then he'll never leave me, and he'll finally realize his true feelings for me." She's sick, I thought to myself. We took another sharp turn, and by now we were headed into the Rogue District. I felt my stomach twist inside of me as we picked up speed, and all I could do at this point was hold Ella as tightly as possible, as though that would keep her safe from this maniac. "And, you know," Kelly said as she drove, her voice raising in pitch, "it's been really hard lately. Ever since you survived the Rogue District, which you weren't supposed to, by the way, in case you already didn't know, my parents have been punishing me. I'm sure you remember how hard it is to be a peasant. I've been miserable. Edric had them cut me off from the money, but once I marry him, it won't matter anymore. I'll never need to worry about money again." While Kelly spoke, I began to subtly look around for anything that I could use to defend Ella and myself or escape with. A heavy flashlight, an ice scraper, anything that could have been in the back of the car. But there was nothing. Outside the car, the streets of the entry of the Rogue District were lined with hungry rogues who looked at the car as if it were their next meal. Kelly ranted for a long time about her parents' money and how she had been cut off. All the while, I desperately searched for ways to escape. I even pleaded with my wolf to see if I could shift once the car stopped, but I couldn't. It was too early, and she was too weak. I was certain that Kelly somehow knew that, and that was why all of this came together on that night. Eventually, the roads darkened and turned from brightly straight city streets to dark and ominously twisting alleyways, and soon the city lights were nothing but dots in the distance. Even in the car, I could feel the weight of the darkness and the silence all around us as we went further and further into the Rogue District. At least, I told myself, Ella could shift when we got out of the car and make a run for it. At least she could stand a chance. Finally, we pulled down a long, narrow road. Eventually, a large brick building came into view. I could tell from its square shape and large paned windows with broken glass that it was an abandoned warehouse. And it was likely to be the place that I would die that night. "When the car door opens, I want you to shift and run away," I whispered into Ella's ear as quietly as I could. She looked up at me with wide eyes and shook her head, but I squeezed her shoulders and looked at her intensely, mouthing only 3 words: I love you." Kelly came to a stop and got out of the car. The car door opened on my side first. I gave Ella one last look, wishing that I could tell her that I was sorry before I got out. "Give me your hands," Kelly said. I complied, only because I wanted her to be distracted with tying me up while Ella ran. Behind me, I heard a scuffle as Ella leaped out of the car and made a run for it. "Shit," Kelly said. And then something hit the side of my head, and everything went black. Edric. When I picked Moana and Ella up from school that day, I could tell that something was off. Moana seemed distant and cold and stiffened under my touch. Was she really still that angry over what I had said the other day? I was only worried about her, and I didn't want her to get hurt by going out by herself. Moana was normally a level-headed person, so for her to be so angry over something so simple for days was out of character for her. But I just figured that it was pregnancy hormones, or maybe the potion that the mother witch gave me to keep her wolf from emerging was making her a bit cranky. Moana stayed in her room for the remainder of the day. She said that she wasn't feeling well, so I figured that it really was the pregnancy after all. I decided to give her plenty of space to rest, but by the time I put Ella to bed that night, Moana still hadn't come out of her room. I thought about going into her room and checking on her. But after a few moments of standing silently outside her door, I decided against it and instead went to bed without her. A few hours passed after that. I tossed and turned the entire time, and finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed Moana by my side in order to sleep. Maybe if I talked to her sincerely and apologized for making her angry, she wouldn't be so cold toward me. I still hadn't apologized for what I said during our last argument, after all. I made my way over to Moana's room and raised my fist to knock on the door. But when I did, the door just swung open, and Moana's bed was empty. Figuring that Ella may have had a bad dream and that Moana was sleeping with her, I decided to go over to Ella's room. I slowly cracked the door open and peered inside, not wanting to wake Ella up. What I saw made my blood run cold. Ella's bed was empty. "Ella?" I called into the room, frantically looking around as though they would both suddenly appear out of thin air. "Moana?" There was no answer. My first instinct was to check the closet and the bathroom, which were, of course, both empty. My heart pounded then as I flung the window open and looked down at the street below, praying that I wouldn't see their bodies laying on the sidewalk. But I couldn't imagine why Moana would have jumped, and there was nothing down there anyway. I flew into a rage after that. My wolf almost completely took over. I didn't shift, but I went into pure instinct mode and began frantically searching the penthouse. Selena and the maids were all woken up by my shouting and banging, and when they came out of their rooms and I explained the situation, they all flew into a frenzy as well. Moana and Ella were nowhere to be found. I called the police. Thanks to my status, several of the city's best police and investigators were at the penthouse within 30 minutes. "Does your fiancé have any enemies? Anyone who would kidnap her or give her a reason to run?" one of the investigators asked while the others searched the penthouse thoroughly. At first, I shook my head, but then I remembered the Rogue District. "Kelly," I said, my heart pounding so fast that I felt as though I would be sick. "Kelly hates her. She already tried something once." The investigator furrowed his brow and scribbled something in his notebook. After that, the police set up a phone tracer. Since I knew Kelly, I would be easy to contact her, but if she did kidnap Ella and Moana, then we would need to trace her call so we could find them. I just hoped that we could find them before it was too late. "They'll find them," Selena said, her voice shaking as she squeezed my arm tightly. "They'll find them." I couldn't speak. I could hardly even move. All I could do was stare numbly at the wall in front of me, praying that nothing horrible would happen to my mate and my daughter. I wished that I had told Moana how much I loved her. And if we did find them, I would never let her go another day without knowing the extent of my love for her. Now, more than ever, my fear of commitment felt so silly. I should have married her on the day I met her. Suddenly, my phone began to ring. The investigator waved me over, where my phone was hooked up to a call tracer. "Just try to keep her on the phone as long as possible," the investigator said. "Just keep her talking. We'll let you know once we've traced the call." I nodded numbly, then swallowed and shakily picked up the phone. "Hello?" I answered. "Hey, handsome," Kelly's voice croaked on the other end. "I've missed you." Her voice sounded strained and nasally, like she had completely lost her mind. I didn't know if it was drugs or what, but it didn't matter. I just needed to keep her on the phone. I decided to play dumb to keep her talking for longer, as though I hadn't found out yet that Moana and Ella were gone. "Hey, Kelly," I said, resisting the urge to growl obscenities and threaten her life. I wanted so badly to reach through the phone and rip her to shreds, but I knew that I had to stay calm. "It's late. Is everything okay?" Kelly giggled, then fell silent for a moment. Her giggle almost seemed to echo. She sounded as though she was in a big, empty room. "Have you noticed that anything is missing?" she said, then laughed again. "Of course you have. I know you're trying to keep me on the phone, but I can make this easier for you so you don't have to go out of your way to save the nanny and your little bitch of a daughter. I'll release them if you promise to marry me. Deal?" "Really?" I thought to myself. "That's why she's doing this? Because she still can't get over me? But how do I know you're not lying?" I asked, watching with wide eyes as the investigators gestured to indicate that we were almost there and we almost had her location. "What if I promise to marry you and then you do something to them?" Once again, Kelly let out an insane giggle. She really did sound as though she had gone completely mad. "I guess you'll just have to find out," she said. "You have two choices. You can either refuse to marry me, and then they'll definitely die, or you can promise to marry me, and they'll only maybe die." Suddenly, the investigator gave me a thumbs up to indicate that they had successfully traced the call. I opened my mouth to say something to Kelly, anything to placate her long enough until we got there so she wouldn't hurt Moana and Ella. But then I heard the sound of a scuffle. I heard Kelly let out a yelp, and then silence. My eyes went wide. Had Moana knocked her out? I hoped so. More than anything, I hoped that was the case. "It looks like she was calling from a location on the outskirts of the city," one of the investigators said. "But that's not all." "What is it?" I asked, feeling my heart stop in my chest. The investigator swallowed, then looked at me with concern written across his face. "It's located in the Rogue District." Edric. "It's located in the Rogue District," the investigator said, his face pale and his eyes wide. The Rogue District was such a dangerous place that even the police were terrified to go there. But I wasn't. If I had to fight 1,000 rogues to save Moana and Ella, then I would do it. "Let's go," I said, storming over to the door. "Mr. Morgan, are you sure it's safe for you to come?" one of the cops began, but I whirled around to glare at him intensely. I could feel my eyes beginning to glow, and my stare alone was enough to make the cop fall silent and shut his mouth. The rest of the cops nodded, and we left Selena and the maids standing in the foyer. "Stay here and call me immediately if Moana happens to show up," I told Selena as the elevator doors closed. The last thing I saw was her nodding grimly, with tears in her eyes. The police had their cars parked outside. I climbed into the passenger seat with the police chief, and then we were on our way. As we drove across town, I couldn't stop thinking about what Kelly had implied, how she thought that I would actually marry her in exchange for Moana and Ella's lives. But the sound of whatever happened at the end seemed promising. I could only hope that Moana had broken free and knocked Kelly out. Hopefully, we would arrive to find both Ella and Moana safe, and Kelly restrained so she couldn't cause any more trouble. What surprised me, though, was the obvious lack of a struggle. Neither Moana nor Ella's room seemed to have anything out of place. It was as though they simply got up and walked out. Although I suppose that I wouldn't have been terribly surprised if Kelly had threatened them and forced them to leave quietly. For all I knew, maybe she gave them something to make them sleep and had her men take them away. Honestly, the latter was preferable in some ways, at least for Ella. I would have preferred if she could have just been magically asleep for everything so that it wouldn't haunt her later. But deep down, I logically knew that that wasn't going to be the case. The squad of police cars made their way through the city, using their lights to make traffic move aside so we could get quickly through the city. It wasn't long before we finally arrived at the entrance of the Rogue District. "You ready?" The cop who was driving asked me as we drove into the darker part of town, where rogues lined the streets and stared at us as we drove past. I nodded grimly, just trying not to look out the windows too much in case any of the rogues got pissed off and decided to attack. As we drove, the streets began to get narrower and darker. The cop had a map on his console with the location that Kelly's call came from pinged on it, and as we got closer, it felt as though the tall buildings were caving in on us. The darker the rogue district became, the heavier and more sickening it felt. On either side of the street, I could see rogues wandering aimlessly. They looked at the cop cars with suspicion, and I knew that if we ran into the wrong group of rogues, they could easily block us off in these narrow streets. And eventually, that was exactly what happened. Up ahead, a group of rogues came out of an alleyway and blocked the street. "Shit," the cop murmured. He pulled out his radio and contacted the other cars behind us. "Looks like we've got a purple up here," he said. "I'm gonna slow down and see if they move." The cop slowed down, but the rogues didn't move. He came to a stop and sat there for a few seconds, then clicked his radio again, this time using the speaker on the car to address the rogues. "Move out of the way," he said firmly. "We need to pass. This is an emergency." But even then, the rogues didn't move out of the way. In fact, they only began to walk closer to the car. More rogues came out of the alleyway then, and by that point, there were at least 10, maybe even 20 of them blocking all exits. "God damn it," the cop said. Suddenly, all of the rogues shifted at once and descended on the line of cop cars. The car shook violently as 2 rogues jumped on the hood, barking and snarling. The cop and I looked at each other in shock for a moment before he radioed something that I couldn't understand to the other cops, then got out his gun and got out of the car. Gunshots fired all through the alleyway. The rogues and the police erupted into a violent fight. I couldn't just sit there and hope that the police would fight through the rogues. I needed to help. I quickly jumped out and felt myself begin to shift. As I shifted, several rogues circled around me and began to snarl and claw at me. I clawed back with more intensity, slamming myself into their sides and sending them flying with a chorus of yelps while gunshots rang all around me. Another rogue came, this one bigger, and bared his teeth at me. "Who paid you?" I asked, snarling back at him. The rogue's voice echoed in my head. He was laughing. "I'll never tell," he replied. "But I'll say this, it'll just be easier if you lay down and accept your fate." I stifled my own laugh. "Like hell I will," I responded. Then, in one quick movement, I darted forward and collided with the large rogue. We grappled on the ground for several long moments, rolling back and forth in a ball of claws and teeth. At one point, I managed to pin him to the ground and snapped my teeth at his throat. But he got his legs under me somehow and kicked me off, throwing me back against the brick wall of a building. I felt the air get knocked out of my lungs as I got slammed into the wall, but I wasted no time in scrambling back to my feet and making another charge at him. As I fought the rogue, I only kept one thing in my mind, Moana's and Ella's faces. I pictured their smiles when I would come to their rescue, and that was what helped me to fight. It filled me with strength, and with one final surge of power, I managed to clamp my teeth around the rogue's neck and throw him so hard against a wall that I heard a sickening crunch, and then he fell silent. Around me, gunshots continued to ring out as the police fought against the remaining rogues. With a nod to the police chief, I charged at another large rogue and placed a deep gash in his side with my claws, causing him to fall to the ground with a whimper. Amidst all of the chaos, a few more rogues fell to the ground as bullets pierced their flesh and fur. I shifted back just as a path was cleared, and the cops and I jumped back into the cars and sped off with a chorus of screeching tires. "I'm coming, Moana," I thought to myself as I gripped the car dashboard while the cop sped through the narrow street, knocking more rogues out of the way with the car. "I'm coming, Ella. Daddy's coming, Moana." When I came to, I felt myself sitting in a chair with my wrists tied behind me. My head was pounding from the blow that knocked me out, but that wasn't the only thing I felt on my head. Something cold and hard was pressed up against my temple. My eyes fluttered open, squinting against the bright light of a spotlight. The light was so bright as it shined down on me that I could hardly see past it, but I could tell that I was inside the warehouse now. The cold metal thing pressed harder into my temple. And then, a familiar voice spoke out. "Hello, Moana." I jumped at the voice and whipped my head around, my eyes widening as I saw Ethan standing beside me with a gun raised to my head. "Ethan?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Ethan smiled. It was that same creepy smile that I saw on the night of the banquet when he didn't think that I was looking. But now, he knew that I was looking right at him, and he didn't bother to keep up the facade anymore. "Didn't expect to see me, huh?" he asked. "Where's Ella?" I asked. I looked around frantically, only to see her tied to another chair next to me. She was sleeping. "What did you do to her?" "Don't worry," Ethan said calmly. "She's not hurt, just under a spell. That way she won't need to experience any of this. She will have just gone to sleep, and she'll never wake up." I shook my head vehemently as tears began to pool up in my eyes. "Ethan, you don't need to do this," I begged. "At least don't hurt Ella. Please. I thought we were friends. Why are you doing this?" Ethan sighed, but continued to press the barrel of the pistol in his hand against my head. "You're both innocent," he admitted. "But you see, it's not that simple. It was thanks to Edric and his parents that my beautiful mother killed herself." "His mother killed herself?" I thought back to the news article that Olivia showed me the other day, and it never indicated that she killed herself. In fact, it indicated quite the opposite, that Michael had killed her. And knowing Michael, I was sure of it. Did he really sink his claws in so much that he convinced Ethan that his poor mother killed herself? "Ethan, I began, but was quickly cut off by the gun pushing harder into my temple. A choked sob caught in my throat, followed by a whimper. "Just shut the fuck up," Ethan snarled. "It's going to be easier on all of us if you just shut up and don't talk. Now, where was I?" He paused for a moment, still holding the gun against his head, and then his face lit up. "So, as I was saying, I've been looking for ways to get back at that God-forsaken family. I wanted to make them feel the same pain that I felt when my mother died. First, when I was a kid, I tried killing the family pets. It started with a pet bird, then a cat, and a puppy that Michael got for Edric on his birthday. But although it caused them pain, it wasn't enough. It wasn't the same sort of pain that I felt when I found my mom's body laying in her bathtub. Ever since then, I've been plotting the perfect way to make them all suffer greatly. At first, I was just going to kill Ella, since Edric didn't have anyone else that he actually gave a shit about. But then, you came into the picture. You, with your pretty face, your long red hair, and your hot body." Ethan paused then, his eyes traveling down from my face to my neck, my breasts, over my belly, and down to my thighs. But even then, as he drank me in with his eyes, he never once lowered the gun. I felt myself trembling violently beneath the cold metal of the barrel. My eyes then caught something in the corner, just beyond the bright light that was shining on me. It was someone's body, laying in a heap. It was Kelly. "Of course," he continued, "my half-brother was taken with you from the start, and I don't blame him. You're a gem, Moana, a real gem. But you're too perfect not to kill. You're the perfect key that I've been missing. Once you and Ella are both gone, then Edric will finally know what it's like to be truly alone, to be truly heartbroken. After you, I'll take Verona next. I don't think that Michael is really capable of true human emotions, but he'll still feel the sting of loneliness. She is his mate, after all, despite the fact that he betrayed her by fucking my prostitute mother." "What about Kelly?" I asked, nodding my head toward where Kelly lay. "What did she ever do to you? From the looks of it, she only ever helped you. Did you kill her too?" Ethan shrugged. "She's not dead, just knocked out. Honestly, I couldn't care less about Kelly. She was only ever a pawn throughout all of this. Her insatiable obsession with Edric just made her easy to control, to manipulate. As I'm sure you're guessing now, judging from the look on your face, yes. I did tell her to hire those rogues a while back to kidnap you. But of course, Edric came to your rescue. It's okay, though. Now, it'll be even easier to pin everything on her." He paused then, and lowered the gun slightly before making an innocent face like a puppy dog. His eyes became big and filled with tears, and his lower lip started to quiver. "Officers! Kelly killed them! I had to knock her out!" But it was too late. Look at how their skulls are filled with bullet holes. She's insane!" When he was finished, his face went cold again, and he let out a wry chuckle before harshly pressing the gun up against my temple again. But this time, I didn't flinch away. Instead, I turned my head and spat on him. A wad of spit landed on the front of his shirt. He grimaced at it for a moment in shock before his cold, emotionless gaze returned to me. "I trusted you," I growled. "I thought you were my friend." "Well, you shouldn't have been so naive," Ethan replied coldly. "Maybe you should have listened to Edric when he kept telling you to stay away." He paused, then, licking his lips, and shot me a toothy grin. "You know, that night that I took you out to dinner, I did want to have sex with you, of course. How could I not? I do like you, Moana, but you refused." "Would you have killed me anyway?" I whispered. "Even if I had slept with you that night like you wanted, would you have still decided to kill me?" Ethan stared at me for a moment with a strange light in his eyes. He chuckled grimly, but then his smile quickly faded, and he shoved the gun harder against my head. "Of course I still would have killed you," he said, his voice so nonchalant that it made me sick. "You slipped through my fingers that night, though. Your innocence, your devotion, made me hesitate. For too long, I went back and forth on whether I should do it, but I've made my decision now." He grinned, clicking the safety off on the gun as his eyes glinted in the light. "And now I'm finally going to get it over with." "Moana, and now I'm finally going to get it over with," Ethan said as he clicked the safety off on the gun. During that moment, it felt as though everything froze in time. My mind began to race with a million different things, a million different outcomes. In the corner of my eye, Ella continued to sleep peacefully, oblivious to everything around her. Kelly laid motionless in the corner, and the spotlight that was beaming on my face blinded me so that I couldn't see anything beyond it. "Mina, I need you," I thought, searching for my wolf's presence. "Please, I know you're scared, but we have to do something. We can't let him kill Ella." My wolf, who had been hiding in terror as it seemed as though Ethan would surely kill me, showed her presence slightly. "Keep him talking," she said, her voice echoing in my mind. "Edric will find us soon. Just keep him talking." I swallowed, hard, and suddenly turned my head to stare straight down the barrel of the gun. Upon seeing my face, Ethan hesitated. His finger, which had been on the trigger, moved away. I felt as though something in him softened when I looked into his eyes, as though the sweet and gentle artist who I had come to call my friend was still in there somewhere. It was a tiny spark, but it was there. "If I'm going to die, at least let me ask some questions so I can die in peace," I pleaded. "Please, I just want some answers before I die." Ethan paused, then slowly lowered the gun after a long time. As he did, I felt as though the gripping sensation around my heart lessened, and I could breathe again. "Go on," he said, his voice low and grim. "What are your questions?" My mind scrambled, searching for something that would make him talk. Finally, I came up with something. "When I talked to Olivia, she said that I'm the golden wolf," I said. "Is that true? Did you know that?" Ethan slowly nodded. "Yes," he replied quietly. "You are. How do you know?" I asked. "Edric went to the Mother Witch," Ethan responded. "She confirmed it. I had an inkling of it myself, and so I went to the Mother Witch after him. Believe it or not, despite her abilities as an oracle, she didn't seem to realize that I was just using my status and my charm to get information. She told me everything. But now that I think of it, there is something else that she told me. Maybe you should know before you die." I nodded vehemently. "Yes," I begged. "Please tell me. Whatever it is, I want to know before I die." Ethan sighed and passed his hand over his face. I noticed that he was staring at the floor, as though he didn't want to look at me. He didn't want to look his prey in the face. There really was still a shred of humanity in there that didn't want to be a killer. I was sure of it. "All right," Ethan finally said. "She only hinted at it, but I believe it's true. You see, Michael has always hated humans. The idea of a golden wolf, someone who would bring humans and werewolves together in harmony, is something that he despises. So he killed your parents, Moana." As Ethan spoke, my blood ran cold. Michael Morgan killed my parents? Was that why they left me at the orphanage? To protect me? But that wasn't my main concern right now, because in the distance, I could see what looked like the red and blue flashing of police lights through one of the broken windows of the warehouse. Ethan didn't see it, as he was too focused on his story. I just needed to keep him talking for a little longer. "You're sure of this?" I asked. "The Mother Witch was sure of it?" Can she prove it? Ethan chuckled. She can't prove it now because she's dead. I killed her. My eyes widened. The Mother Witch was known by all as the most powerful oracle in the world. How did you do what? I whispered. And why? Oh, Moana, Ethan said. He reached out then, finally lifting his gaze to meet me as he brought his hand up to my cheek. His hand was cold and clammy. You're so naive, so innocent. Don't you know that I couldn't let the Mother Witch live? She was an oracle, after all. My charm and my wit can only take me so far with someone like that. So of course she started to sense that something was wrong. But even though she's an oracle, her neck is still soft and made of flesh, and my knife was sharp. I swallowed again, trying as hard as I could not to look past Ethan at the approaching lights. Thanks to the spotlight around us, the red and blue police lights didn't show unless he were to look back at them. If I could just keep him talking, keep him looking at me, then he wouldn't notice. My mind raced for another few moments before I suddenly had another idea. Trying to hide my fear, I smiled gently and leaned my hand into Ethan's palm. I softened my eyes as I looked up at him and bit my lower lip. Ethan may have been a monster, but he was still a man, and men had desires. You know, I did really like you, I whispered, noticing as his eyes began to widen slightly. I only turned you down that night because of the baby, but if I'm going to die anyway, what do you say? Ethan stared at me for a few moments as though thinking. His thumb rubbed along my cheek, then came down and ran across my lower lip. It took every fiber in my body not to tremble in a terrified manner at his touch. I had to keep him occupied, keep him looking at me. You had feelings for me at some point, didn't you? I murmured. Slowly, Ethan nodded. His eyes flickered down to my lips and to my breasts. But then his hand dropped back to his side and he looked away, then raised the gun again. I did, he whispered, but not anymore. Your death is too valuable. Get down on the ground, a voice suddenly shouted. Ethan whipped around, and I almost laughed out loud in relief when I saw several police rush in with their guns raised. My heart leaped when I saw Edric rush in with them, and his eyes widened when he saw me. I wanted so badly to run to him, to apologize for everything and never leave him again. I never should have listened to Olivia or anyone else. Put the gun down, the police yelled. But Ethan only ran around behind me and wrapped his arm around my neck. He pushed the gun up against my head, causing the police to stop in their tracks, unable to go further. Edric stopped at the front of the group, his hands outstretched for me. Even from here, with the spotlight shining in my face, I could see the terror and fury in his eyes. If anyone takes one more step, I'll shoot her, Ethan said, pressing the gun into my temple. My dear readers, thank you for stopping by and reading this story. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm trying my best to update Asks P. I'll appreciate it if you explore my other stories as well. Please follow my page, Eve Above Story, and Group Eve's Alphas if you want to chat or keep updated on my writing schedule. Yours, Eve Above Story, Edric. We finally located the place where Kelly called us from. It was a rundown, abandoned warehouse nestled deeply into the rogue district where it was so dark that even the lights of the city from afar couldn't brighten the place. Behind the warehouse were hundreds of stacked storage containers where the shipping boats came up the river and picked up shipments. But other than that, there was nothing else. No people, no houses, no cars. Nothing. Long story short, it was the perfect place for a crime like this to be carried out. The police quietly surrounded the warehouse and got out, drawing their guns. I wanted to feel relieved, but I couldn't yet until we were certain that Moana and my daughter were safe. When we burst in through the door, however, my heart sank. What I saw inside of that warehouse was my worst nightmare. Ethan, my evil half-brother, was holding a gun to Moana's head. "Put the gun down," the police yelled, pointing their guns at Ethan as we burst in. "Get down on the ground." But Ethan didn't waver. In a swift motion, he swung around and stood behind Moana with his arm around her neck and the gun to her head. I could see the fear in her wide eyes, and I wanted so badly to run to her. That sick fuck had her tied up in a chair, and beside her my daughter was also tied up. Ella appeared to be sleeping. My eyes moved back to Moana, who shook her head ever so slightly. She was indicating that Ella wasn't dead. Not yet, at least. I let out a small sigh of relief, but I couldn't be fully relieved until they were both in my arms. "If anyone takes one more step, I'll shoot her," Ethan snarled, putting his finger on the trigger and causing the cops to freeze. "I've already got a bullet in the chamber. Just one wrong move, and I'll blast her brains out." I felt as though my chest was going to explode. Inside of me, Eddie began to rage at the sight of Ethan holding a gun to my mate's head. I wanted to rip him to shreds, but I knew that I couldn't. I needed to be tactful about this if I wanted to bring Moana and Ella home that night. "Ethan," I said, holding my hands up in surrender and trying not to show my intense and unwavering fury. "Why? Why are you doing this?" Beside me, I heard a police officer click the safety off on his gun. I held my arm out to stop him and shook my head. "Don't shoot," I said. "No one shoot." Suddenly, a low and menacing laugh began to rumble in my half-brother's throat. His eyes, which were usually masked by the fake charm that he used to manipulate people, revealed his true self now. Cold, calculating, and twisted. I always wanted to believe that he wasn't born like that it wasn't entirely his fault that he was so messed up, but I couldn't help but think that he was just pure evil from the start. Like he was sent here with the sole purpose of destroying my entire family, from my parents to Moana and Ella now. "You're too good," he said through his laughter. "You work fast. I'll give you that." "Ethan, why are you doing this?" I asked. "What do you want? What's your goal here?" Ethan's laugh faded. His gun was pressed so hard up against Moana's head that I could see her wincing, and his arm was wrapped too tightly around her neck. "You know, I wanted to get this over with before you got here so you could just face the pain of losing them," he said grimly. "But now that you're here, and now that I'm looking at your stupid fucking face, I do want to tell you exactly why this is going to happen to you, why you'll be miserable and alone forever until the day you die." "Please," I said, "enlighten me." "I'm not sure if you remember, or if you even care, but I was the one who found my mother's body," Ethan began to explain. Of course I remembered that. No matter how much I always hated Ethan, I knew how horrific it was for him to find his mother after she had killed herself. I never thought that anyone should ever have to go through that. Either way, it doesn't matter, because that day I decided that I would make you and your family suffer the same pain that I felt when I lost the only person who ever truly loved me. "Why?" I asked, furrowing my brow. I took a step forward, but then Ethan pushed the gun harder into Moana's temple. I watched in horror as she shut her eyes and a tear rolled down her cheek while she trembled, and I held my hands up in surrender again. "Why, Ethan? I'm sorry about your mother. I really am. But what does her death have to do with Moana, or any of us for that matter?" Ethan laughed again. Behind him, in the shadows created by the spotlight, I could see Kelly's body lying motionless on the concrete floor. I tried not to show any indication that I saw her, but it made my stomach drop. Had he killed her? Was that what I heard at the end of her phone call? "I know that you and your father weren't innocent in that matter," Ethan growled. "The coroner covered it up because your son of a bitch father paid him off, but I can still see my mother's body, clear as day. She didn't kill herself. Those cuts on her arms weren't self-inflicted." Now, I was even more confused. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" I asked. "How would you even have known? You were a child." "Because," Ethan shouted, clearly becoming agitated as he tightened his grip around Moana's neck, causing her to gasp for air. "There was no knife. Your father was smart enough to pay the coroner off, but he took the knife with him when he was finished killing my mother." My eyes widened. I didn't know what to say. I wouldn't have been terribly surprised if my father had orchestrated that. When the papers came out about her death, they had only ever said that she died from suicide. Only one paper ever claimed that my father may have had something to do with it, as the news of Ethan's existence as my father's son had only begun to circulate a few months prior. Ethan's mother was a prostitute, so it was easy to cover up her death, as well as to claim that Ethan was not my father's child. But now, it made sense. Either way, though, only my father was to blame for this. No one else. "Why punish Moana and Ella for something that my father did?" I asked, taking another tentative step forward. "Your gripe should be with him, not them. Just let them go, Ethan." But Ethan just stared back at me with a maniacal look on his face and pressed the gun harder into my mate's temple. "Edric, Ethan continued to hold the gun firmly up against Moana's head. In the white glow of the bright spotlight that was trained on us, I could see the way that Moana's red hair was stuck to her neck from sweating as her adrenaline surged through her. The ropes that held her to the hard metal chair in the middle of the floor crossed over her belly, restricting the little life inside of her. Seeing her like this made me feel physically sick, and if Ethan didn't have a gun in his hand, then I would have ripped him to shreds as soon as I saw what he had done to her. "Just let them go, Ethan," I pleaded as I took another tentative step forward. However, Ethan just pushed the gun harder into Moana's temple. "You're a liar," he said through his teeth. "I know that you and your mother had something to do with it too. Don't take me for a fool, Edric. Your family has done nothing but brought me pain, and now I'll make you feel the same pain." "Ethan, I seriously have no idea what you're talking about," I said. "My mother loved you like you were her own son. Sure, you and I never got along, but I would have never wanted your mother to die. I would never wish that sort of pain upon you." Ethan stared at me for a few moments with the gun still pressed up against Moana's head and his arm wrapped firmly around her neck. Thankfully, as I spoke, his grip seemed to loosen, allowing Moana to finally draw in a deep breath. Beside her, Ella continued to sleep. I could see now that Ella's chest was rising and falling gently, which filled me with immense relief. Ethan must have put her under a spell to make her sleep. I was glad that she wouldn't have to see any of this, and I hoped that she wouldn't remember anything from this horrible night if I got her out of here. In the corner, though, Kelly still laid motionless on the floor. I couldn't tell if she was alive or dead. "Did you kill Kelly?" I asked, nodding my head toward her. Ethan chuckled. "Not yet," he replied. Good, I thought to myself. As much as I despised Kelly for what she did to Moana in the Rogue District and for how nasty she was, I didn't want her to die. I knew now that Ethan probably played a rather large role in that whole ordeal, too. For all I knew, he had been whispering bullshit into her ear since the beginning, not molding her into this horrible person who hated Moana's very existence. There was no doubt in my mind that Ethan had orchestrated this entire kidnapping as well and has probably used Kelly as a pawn. "Listen," I said, "Moana and Ella don't need to be involved in this. They're both innocent, and I know that you care about both of them, although you won't admit it right now. So why don't you put the gun down, and we'll settle this like men." For a few moments, Ethan just stared at me. He seemed to loosen his grip on Moana a little more, but he didn't seem to fully believe me. He nodded at the cops with his head. "What about them? They'll just shoot me if I put the gun down." I shook my head, then turned back to look at the cops. "Why don't we all put the guns down at once?" I asked. "Everyone. No one is getting shot tonight. You and I can handle this the old-fashioned way, with our fists. No weapons, no interference." There was a long silence. I stared intently at the cops, who looked back at me with disbelief while their guns were still trained on Ethan. Of course it was risky, but it was the only way to get the gun off of Moana's head. Finally, the police chief nodded grimly and slowly laid his gun down on the ground. After a few moments of hesitation, the other police followed suit. What Ethan didn't know was that there was a sniper trained on him from outside, ready to shoot just in case he tried anything. But, surprisingly, he didn't try anything. Not yet, at least. Much to my surprise, he set his gun down and released his grip from around Moana's neck. Moana let out a huge sigh of relief. I could see that her face was streaked with tears, but they had all dried by now. Later, I would have to make sure she knew just how brave I thought she was for holding it together. It was clear that she had been distracting Ethan and stalling for time when we came in. If she hadn't done that, then both Moana and Ella very well might have been dead by the time we found the warehouse. "Untie her," I said, nodding my head toward Moana. "Ella, too. Untie both of them and let them go over to the police." Ethan hesitated for a few moments. I could tell that he didn't believe me. He looked at Moana then. "Ethan, please," she begged, her voice shaking. "Please, I know you care about us. Please let us go." Something about Moana made Ethan do it. Solemnly, he untied both of them, first Ella, then Moana. Ella immediately jumped up and rushed over to Ella, who she scooped up and carried over to me. I pulled them both into my arms, feeling Moana sob quietly into my chest. Realistically, I could have had the police shoot Ethan while he was still standing there, but that night I was overtaken with rage at what he had done. I needed to feel his flesh beneath my fists. I wanted to beat him to a pulp. He had put my fated mate, my daughter, and my unborn child in serious danger. If he thought that he felt pain when his own mother died, then that pain would feel minuscule in comparison to the pain I was about to inflict on him. Inside of me, my wolf raged nonstop. He couldn't wait to sink his teeth into Ethan's flesh. "Go and stand with the cops," I whispered, cupping Moana's face in my hands and kissing her forehead. "You're safe now." "You're not really going to fight him, are you?" Moana asked. "It's too dangerous. I'll be fine." I kissed her forehead again and reached over to touch Ella's face. After all of this was over, I decided then and there that I was going to give both of them the best day in their lives. I didn't care how much it cost. I just wanted to show them how grateful I was to have them in my life. I should have made sure that Moana knew that all along instead of pushing her away. Hesitantly, Moana carried Ella over to the police. I watched as the police surrounded her, barricading her within their circle. One of them took Ella, and another wrapped a blanket around Moana to comfort her while she continued to stare at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Well," Ethan said, "are you going to fight me or not?" "Moana." I wanted to beg Edric not to fight and to just let the police take Ethan away, but it seemed as though Edric had his sights set on a fist fight with Ethan. As I watched them roll up their sleeves and prepare to fight, I just hoped that Edric was a good fighter and that Ethan wouldn't pull any dirty tricks. One of the cops took Ella, who was thankfully still asleep. He took her to one of the police cars and asked if I wanted to come to safety, but I couldn't rip my eyes away from Edric. I felt so stupid for not trusting Edric. Of course, the conversations with Olivia were all fake, completely fabricated to make me lose trust in him. They wanted to separate me from the one person who would do whatever it would take to keep me safe. Ethan and Edric stood on opposite sides of the open room and got into fighting stances. I watched with bated breath as Edric put his fists up, prepared to fight. Everything felt still and silent, like the calm in the air right before a huge thunderstorm. The air felt static, like there was electricity floating through it. And then Edric charged at Ethan. The two brothers flew into a flurry of punches and kicks. Ethan got one punch in on Edric's cheek, causing him to hesitate for a moment as he shook the pain out of his head, but Edric managed to dodge the next punch. Edric then swiped his leg under Ethan's feet. Ethan tumbled to the ground, but he was incredibly agile thanks to his werewolf blood and bounced right back up a moment later with his fists still raised. He made a hook at Edric's head, which Edric ducked to dodge again. Edric's fist jabbed into Ethan's stomach, causing Ethan to stagger backwards against the wall to catch his breath. While Ethan was up against the wall, Edric flew at him and punched at him furiously. They moved so fast that they were almost a blur because of their werewolf abilities. Edric's fists flew over and over again, and Ethan repeatedly dodged until he managed to uppercut Edric in the jaw and send Edric flying backwards. I gasped loudly as Edric skidded across the floor. His shirt tore from scraping against the cement. "Edric," I called, but he wasn't listening. With a growl, Edric climbed back to his feet. I could see bits of blood beginning to bead up on his skin where his shirt had torn, but the cuts didn't seem to bother him in the slightest. Ethan charged at him again and feinted to the right, but Edric was on his toes and caught Ethan. He picked Ethan up by the neck with one hand, then slammed Ethan into the ground. He was going to kill Ethan. I didn't want anyone to die, but Edric was too furious to be stopped, despite the fact that both I and the police were begging him not to take it too far. Edric wasn't listening, though, and instead punched Ethan in the face repeatedly until Ethan's face was covered in blood. Edric paused then, his chest heaving as he straddled Ethan and stared down at him. Edric's eyes were wide and glowing brighter than I had ever seen them before. Ethan spit out a bloody tooth on the ground and laughed. "You never played nice, Edric," he growled, his voice muddled by the blood. "Every time we roughhoused as kids, you always left me bleeding, but this time you'll be the one who bleeds." Suddenly, Ethan grabbed Edric with an unexpected amount of force for someone whose face had practically just been beaten to a pulp. He grabbed him around the neck and yanked him closer, growling as he did, and then headbutted Edric hard. Edric reeled at this, and I cried out with fear. I tried to rush out to him, but one of the cops stopped me and held me back, shaking his head. "It's best you stay out of it, miss," he said quietly. "Once two alphas start fighting, no one can break them up." I could only watch in abject horror as Ethan then threw Edric's body to the ground, while causing Edric to slide across the floor once more. Groaning, Ethan slowly climbed to his feet and limped over to Edric. He put his foot on Edric's head, turning it this way and that as though inspecting it, before grabbing a fistful of Edric's shirt and pulling him up a bit. He punched Edric square in the face. Edric's head snapped back and his eyes rolled into the back of his head for a moment. "Let me go," I begged, wrenching myself free from the cop. "He's going to die." Ethan, hearing my struggle, turned to face me. He shot me a bloody, menacing grin and then stepped out of the way, gesturing to Edric. "Go ahead," he said. "Say your goodbyes. He'll die soon." The cops flew into action then, scrambling to pick up their guns while Ethan just laughed and stood there. I shoved my way through them and ran over to Edric's side. His forehead was cracked open from Ethan head-butting him and he was losing a lot of blood. When I ran up to him and fell to my knees, cupping his face in my hands, his glazed-over eyes flickered open. "Edric," I whispered, blinking back the tears that were in my eyes. "It's okay, I'm here." Edric slowly shook his head. "I'm not gonna make it," he replied. "I'm losing too much blood. I can't heal like this." Behind me, I could hear Ethan fighting the police. Somehow, he was managing to take all of them down. He was too fast and agile, and his strength was unparalleled. There was chaos behind me, but I only cared about Edric. "I can heal him," Mina said suddenly. "If you mark him, then I'll be able to heal his wounds, no matter how bad they are." My eyes widened. Mina was a genius. It was bound to work. I didn't know much about werewolves, but I knew that mates had superior abilities when they were together. If I could just mark Edric, then he would heal faster. He'd be stronger too. "Let me mark you," I whispered. "I can do it." Edric shook his head again, but more adamantly this time. "You can't," he said. "I won't let you." "Why?" I asked. "It'll save your life." "You're the golden wolf," Edric replied. "If you mark me, your wolf will emerge, and you might shift. It'll be dangerous for both you and the baby. Besides, He paused for a moment, coughing. A bit of blood trickled out of the corner of his mouth. "Besides what?" I whimpered, cupping his face. "What is it?" "Besides," Edric continued, his voice barely a croak as the puddle of blood on the floor grew in size. "I've been putting a serum in your coffee to keep your wolf from emerging. I didn't want you to be in danger." I felt a new wave of tears burst forth where the others had dried. I shook my head, clamping Edric's hand tightly in mine. "No," I whispered, ignoring the chaos of gunfire and snarling behind me as Ethan fought the police. I glanced over my shoulder to discover that several rogues had joined the fight, no doubt hired by Ethan. If I didn't save Edric, then the rogues were going to kill all of us anyway. "I won't let you die," I said firmly. "Moana, Edric was bleeding out below me. I needed to mark him if I wanted him to survive, but he didn't want me to. He said that it would be bad for the baby. He even admitted that the drops he was putting in my coffee were to specifically prevent this. But he didn't know that I hadn't been drinking my coffee, and I could mark him then and there." "I won't let you die," I said firmly as I held Edric's hand in mine. Behind us, Ethan and several rogues were fighting with the police. It was a flurry of chaos in that abandoned warehouse, and I wasn't sure what would happen if Edric died. Ethan and the rogues, who were likely hired by him, were certain to kill us. I couldn't stop thinking about little Ella, who was still asleep in the cop car. Even Kelly was lying hopelessly in the corner, still unconscious. The cops were struggling with Ethan and the rogues, and I knew that they needed Edric's help. If I marked him and healed him, then he would have the strength to fight better than anyone else there because his mate was at his side. But Edric's eyes widened and he shook his head, despite the fact that blood was pooling up around him. "No," he said. "It's too dangerous for you to mark me. Not with the baby inside of you. Just run and one of the police will get you somewhere safe." I shook my head. I already said that I won't let you die, I whispered. I love you, Edric. The alpha billionaire's eyes widened even further. Before he could respond, I suddenly bent down and pressed my lips against his, kissing him deeply. Inside of me, I could feel my wolf's power surge. She was searching for Edric's wolf so that they could mark each other. Due to Edric's injuries, however, his wolf was weak and Mina struggled to find him. All around me, I could hear the sounds of fighting. Gunshots, raised voices, and animalistic snarling echoed throughout the empty warehouse in a deafening cacophony of noise. I heard the sound of one of the police screaming. "My leg!" the female officer screamed. "The rogue got my leg." I pressed my lips harder against Edric's. I could taste the metallic flavor of his blood on my tongue, but I didn't care. I just kept kissing him, praying that Mina could find his wolf and mark him. A few moments later, I felt Mina's reaction to Edric's wolf. "He's weak," she said, "but I found him." What happened next was a strange sensation that I couldn't even begin to fathom. I suddenly felt as though my soul found a missing piece that I had been without for my entire life. For years, up until this very moment, I hadn't realized it, but I had only been half of a soul. Edric was the other half, and I knew that now. All of the times that I didn't trust him, all of the times that I thought that he was going to hurt me. When I thought that the serum he was putting in my coffee was meant to harm me, but in actuality, he was only trying to protect me, to keep me from shifting too early so that the baby wouldn't be in danger. All of that felt so small now. I felt as though our souls clicked together like two pieces of a puzzle. Everything else around me faded, leaving just Edric and I in a dark space together. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Below me, I could feel Edric's body relax. I quickly pulled away, my eyes searching his face with worry. He was limp. The peace that I felt before dissipated, and I felt my heart catch in my throat as the fighting around me continued. Edric wasn't moving. "Edric," I said, shaking him gently as my eyes filled with tears. "Edric, are you alive? Please don't be dead." Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of laughter. I jerked my head up to see none other than Ethan standing there, grinning maniacally. "I told you he would die," he said. "Did you get to say your goodbyes?" Ethan stormed up to me and suddenly grabbed me by my arm. He hauled me to my feet, wrenching me away from Edric's limp body. I screamed and kicked, bit and clawed, but it was no use. No matter how hard I struggled against Ethan, he was too strong. He was an alpha, and my wolf hadn't fully emerged yet. "Now it's your turn," Ethan said, wrapping his fingers around my neck. His grip tightened around me. I began to gasp for air and choke, flailing my arms. Ethan just stared into my face with a calculated coldness that made me sick to my stomach. "Fuck you," I croaked as I tried to claw at his face. My words only caused Ethan to laugh, and he just choked me even harder. I felt my vision begin to fade. But all I felt inside of me was my wolf's pain, her wild keening over our mate's fate. But then something strange happened. Mina's wailing stopped. "Look," she said. "He's healing." I couldn't turn my head, though. Ethan was holding me too tightly. My vision was fading so much that his image was becoming a dark blob, despite the fact that he was just mere inches from my face. I begged Mina to help me, to give me strength, and she did. I suddenly felt an immense amount of strength surge through me. I didn't know what happened exactly. All I knew was that one moment Ethan was strangling me to death, and the next moment he was on the ground, groaning and holding his head while I had fallen to my knees. I coughed and sputtered as I regained my vision. All of a sudden, I felt a warm pair of arms wrap around me. "Don't worry," a familiar voice said softly in my ear. "Your alpha is here." I looked up then to see Edric crouching beside me, holding me tightly in his arms. My wolf was right. He had healed after all. I had thought that he was dead, but he was just healing the whole time, and now he exuded a strength that I had never seen anyone possess before. As I looked at him, my hand clapped over my mouth and a sob caught in my throat. He cupped my face in his hands and pulled me toward him. For a moment that felt like an eternity. We kissed each other, and I felt whole again. But the fight wasn't over. Ethan was getting up. I heard his maniacal laugh again. Well, he teased, finally climbing to his feet. "Looks like we're going to have a round 2, huh?" Edric gave me one last look. His eyes glowed silver, and from this close, I could see that they were sparkling with so much love that it was dazzlingly bright. He gently kissed my forehead, then stood and rolled up his sleeves. With a low, thunderous growl, Edric stepped in front of me and faced Ethan. From where I kneeled on the floor, he looked like a god standing there in the bright light from the spotlight. "Yeah," he said, pushing his sleeves up to his elbows. "I guess we're going to have a round 2. Moana. Edric stood, pushing his sleeves up to his elbows. "I guess we're going to have a round 2, he said. Ethan's bloodied face flashed with what looked like fear. Around us, the rogues seemed to notice Edric's surge in strength. In a flurry of frightened yips and snarls, the rogues took off in their wolf forms, leaving only Ethan to deal with. "I got this," Edric said, holding his hand out to the cops before they could jump in and restrain Ethan. I continued to kneel on the floor, completely in awe of Edric's strength. He looked bigger, even physically, since I marked him. Suddenly, Edric rushed at Ethan with a speed that I had never seen before. Ethan didn't even have time to react before Edric slammed him to the ground so hard that the floor around him cracked. I gasped, jumping to my feet as I clamped my hand over my mouth. Had he killed him? I heard Ethan groan and saw him move. Thankfully, he wasn't dead. Edric picked him up by a fistful of his shirt and growled something in his ear before dropping him back to the floor. He stepped away from Ethan and allowed the cops to restrain him, and as they did, he came back to me and pulled me tightly into his arms. "I told you not to mark me," Edric whispered, stroking my hair as I buried my face in his chest. "I had to," I replied. I looked up to see that the silver glow in Edric's eyes had faded back to his natural icy blue color, but there was something else there now. I could sense immense love coming from Edric's gaze. He kissed my forehead gently, then cupped my face in his hands. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "I'm fine," I said. "Kelly knocked me out earlier by hitting me in the head, but I feel fine." Edric looked concerned and checked my head. Thanks to my wolf growing in strength from marking him, though, my head was healed. There wasn't even a bump or a bruise, whereas before I had felt a splitting headache when I woke up. Behind us, the cops put handcuffs on Ethan and hauled him to his feet. Edric and I watched as they led him out of the warehouse, reading him his Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law." Edric and I followed. Ethan went silently with the cops and didn't protest as they led him over to one of their cars. He seemed defeated. He knew what his fate was now. He would go to prison for what he did. As Edric and I stood in the flashing blue and red lights of the police cars, we saw an ambulance pull up. Several EMTs got out and rushed up to us and began to ask us a million questions while a few more ran inside with a stretcher. By the time they came out with Kelly on the stretcher, she was waking up and groaning and saying nonsense. I was glad that she was alive and that no one had died that night, but at the same time I knew that she, too, would go to prison along with Ethan for what they did. Ahead of us, the cops opened their car door and began to push Ethan inside. That was the only time he struggled, just for a moment. "Moana!" he shouted, yanking against the cops that were holding him. "I'll always love you, I'm sorry." I shuddered as I watched him disappear into the cop car. Edric's arm tightened around me protectively, and although the scene was a cacophony of noise as everyone rushed around, I swore that I could hear him growl slightly under his breath. When the EMTs finally gave us some space, I couldn't keep it in anymore. I turned toward Edric and opened my mouth to begin telling him everything about how I tried to run away, but Edric, seeing this, shook his head and put his finger to his lips. "It's okay," he said gently. "I know you have a lot to tell me, but it can wait. Let's just get home." I closed my mouth and nodded slowly, feeling my face go red. One of the police then waved us over to his car, and as we approached, I let out a massive sigh of relief to see Ella still sleeping peacefully in the back seat. She should come around soon, the EMT who was checking on her said. It looks like someone put her under a simple sleeping spell. When she wakes up, she probably won't remember anything from the last 24 hours. I couldn't help but feel relieved by this, and I knew that Edric felt relieved too. Not only did I, of course, not want Ella to remember anything about being kidnapped and held at gunpoint, But I also didn't want her to remember that I had taken her out of her bed and told her about her biological mother. I never should have done any of it, and I felt awful. From now on, I decided that I wouldn't bring up her mother until Edric was ready. But it did need to happen eventually. That was one thing that I was sure of. Ella couldn't go on for her entire life thinking that her mother was dead. She needed to know what her mother was really like. Of course, I still didn't know Olivia's full story, but from what I observed that night, it seemed to me that she was a liar who took Ethan's money to make me hate Edric. I decided that I would have to get Edric's side of the story, just as I should have done from the beginning. From now on, things would be different. Edric was my mate now. I would never accuse him of trying to hurt me again. I knew now that he only ever wanted to protect me and Ella. Finally, Edric and I climbed into the back of the police car with Ella. Edric wrapped his arms around her sleeping body and held her tightly, rocking her back and forth. I thought that I heard him whisper something to her under his breath, but I didn't pry. The terror he must have felt when he suddenly discovered her missing must have been unparalleled, and now they were reunited. I felt like the worst person alive for doing that to him. The cops pulled away from the empty warehouse. I turned in my seat and watched the big brick building fade into the distance as more police covered the door with crime scene tape. Even as we made our way back through the rogue district, things seemed more peaceful. No rogues bothered us, and it actually seemed as though word of Edric's alpha strength had spread, causing the rogues to cower as the cop car drove past. That night, I couldn't wait to get home. I just hoped that Edric would forgive me when I told him the true story of what had happened. Moana. As the police officer drove us home that night, I felt immense relief wash over me. We made our way out of the dangerous rogue district, and the city began to grow brighter and cleaner as we headed back to the penthouse. The city lights illuminated the inside of the car, and beside me, I could see Edric still cradling the sleeping Ella in his arms. Seemingly without thinking much about it, Edric saw me looking and reached his arm out for me. I hesitated for a moment, still feeling bad about the trouble I had caused, but I finally relented and scooched over to nuzzle down into the crook of his arm. How that I had marked him and my wolf had emerged, his scent overwhelmed me. It was so sweet and tantalizing and filled me with a profuse feeling of peace. But Edric's concerns about my wolf emerging too early weren't unwarranted. I understood that now that Olivia, Ethan, and now Edric had confirmed that I was the golden wolf. Although I didn't know much about the story, I did know that people wanted to hunt the golden wolf. If I shifted, there was a good chance that people would come after me because of my scent. For all I knew, my scent had already permeated the city, and poachers or bounty hunters were looking for me at that very moment. I also knew that, once someone's wolf emerged, they could shift fully at any point. There wasn't much to be done to control it. Most people shifted immediately upon their wolf emerging, but I hadn't shifted yet for some reason. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that I was a late bloomer already, or maybe it was because of the serum that Edric had been giving me. Either way, even though I was still a bit hurt that Edric secretly slipped the serum into my coffee and didn't tell me that he found out that I was the golden wolf, I was glad that I hadn't shifted yet. I only hoped that I could somehow manage to not shift until my baby was safely born. "What will we do if I shift too early?" I whispered to Edric, too curious to stay quiet any longer. He was silent for a few moments before speaking. "We'll take you to the mother witch first thing in the morning," he responded. "She'll know what to do." As Edric spoke, I felt my heart catch in my throat. He didn't know that Ethan had killed the mother witch. "Edric?" I swallowed nervously and rubbed my hand over my protruding belly, hoping that the baby inside of me was still safe and healthy after the whole ordeal. "The mother witch is dead. Ethan killed her. He told me so earlier before you came." Edric froze when I told him that the mother witch was dead. In the darkness, illuminated only by the city lights, I could see that his jaw was set hard as though he was clenching his teeth. His eyes flashed with anger, and his grip around my shoulders tightened slightly. "Fine, then," he said, his voice almost a growl. "I guess we'll have to figure it out ourselves." Thor. I opened my mouth then to tell Edric that there had to be someone else who could help us, but before I could, Ella suddenly began to wake up. She groaned lightly and yawned, rubbing her eyes. Edric and I both sat up abruptly and watched her intently. Both of us let out an audible sigh of relief when her blue eyes popped open and she looked around confusedly. "Daddy? Moana?" she croaked, her voice small from sleepiness. "Where are we?" Edric just shook his head and smiled. "Don't worry about it, Princess," he said gently. "Just go back to sleep." Ella gave both of us a somewhat skeptical look, but she seemed too exhausted to care. Within moments, her eyelids had fluttered shut again, and she was fast asleep once more. I was glad to see her sleep so soundly, and hoped that she would sleep like that through the night. Just for that night, I hoped that we could all sleep soundly. But I knew that that likely wouldn't be the case. My nerves were too frayed from the whole ordeal to be able to sleep. The remainder of the car ride was silent. Eventually, the police officer pulled up to the curb outside of the penthouse and let us out. Now that my adrenaline had worn off, my body felt stiff from everything that had happened, and I needed to take Edric's hand to get out of the back of the cop car. Once we were out, the officer quietly shut the door in order to not wake Ella up and looked at both of us. "I'm going to stay stationed out here for the rest of the night," the officer said, keeping his voice low. "If you need anything, here's my number." He pulled out a business card and handed it to me, since Edric's hands were full while he held Ella. I didn't think that there would be any risk of anything else happening that night, but I still felt grateful that the officer promised to stay. If anything went south with my situation as the Golden Wolf, then at least we would have the police close by. But if I was being honest, I felt plenty safe with Edric. "Thank you," Edric said with a polite nod. "Thanks for everything you've done tonight. I hope the rest of your men and women are okay after that fight." The officer nodded. "They're fine," he said. "A few bites and scratches here and there, but nothing serious." He then looked at me, and his eyes subtly flickered down to my belly. "Are you sure you don't need to go to the hospital? I can take you right now, and I'll make sure that you can skip the waiting time." I put my hand over my belly and shook my head. That night, I just wanted to be home. "I'll take her to the doctor first thing in the morning," Edric said, his voice firm as he looked at me as though he was secretly telling me that there would be no way that I could get out of it. "For now, I think it's best if we're all home for the night." As Edric spoke, he looked at me with a calm sternness in his eyes. Something in me made me think that he secretly knew that I had left with Ella earlier that night. But he didn't seem terribly angry about it, more concerned than anything. I knew that when we got upstairs, we would be having a long discussion about everything. "All right," the officer said. "Well, like I said, I'll be here if you need anything. Oh, and miss," he stopped us just as we were turning to head inside and gave me a gentle look. "You did well tonight. Your poise, calm demeanor, and stalling for time saved both of your lives tonight." I smiled weakly, thanked the officer, and then headed inside with Edric. Little did the officer know that I had essentially caused the entire debacle to begin with. Moana. We headed upstairs after the police officer dropped us off. When we arrived, Selena and the maids were sitting on the couch and immediately jumped up when they heard us coming. "Oh, thank goodness!" Selena cried, rushing toward me and pulling me into her arms. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" I shook my head, then put my finger over my lips and pointed at Ella, who was still sleeping on Edric's shoulder. Selena nodded and wiped her tears away. Edric took Ella back to her room without a word, leaving me alone with Selena and the maids. "Moana, what happened?" Amy asked, keeping her voice low. "We were worried sick. I'll explain everything tomorrow," I said. "But we're okay. We're safe." This didn't seem to fully satisfy the maids. Lily opened her mouth to ask me more questions, but Selena hushed her and sent them both off to her room. Selena left too, but not before giving me another tight hug that took me just as much by surprise as the first one. As she hugged me, I couldn't help but relax a bit into her arms, feeling comforted by the old housekeeper's touch. When we pulled away, there were tears in both of our eyes. Selena looked like she was about to say something, but she seemed to decide against it and instead simply patted my hand gently before leaving. A A few minutes later, Edric returned to the living room. He looked exhausted, and his clothes were torn and filthy. Mine were just as dirty, no doubt from being dragged at some point while I was unconscious. Neither of us spoke as we cleaned ourselves off and changed into clean pajamas. We climbed into bed and laid there motionless in the darkness for a long time, but I knew that neither of us would be able to sleep, and I couldn't keep my story in any longer. I felt as though it was best to get it out now, before it was too late. I ran away, I admitted, feeling a lump form in my throat as I stared up at the ceiling. This is all my fault. For weeks, I've been talking to Olivia. She convinced me that you were going to take my baby from me, and that you're just using me to get another alpha heir. I found out that you were putting those drops in my coffee, and then I decided to run away with Ella. Edric was silent for a long time. The entire time I felt as though my heart would burst out of my chest, wondering what he was going to say. I wondered if he would yell at me or kick me out. Was it possible to denounce a mate? But he didn't do any of those things. In fact, he did quite the opposite. In the darkness, Edric reached out for me. I felt his arms wrap around me, and he pulled me close to him, so close that all I could feel was his warmth and his scent enveloping me. He stayed silent for a long time after that before he finally spoke. "I'm sorry that I made you feel like you needed to run," he whispered. "I should have been honest with you from the beginning, about everything. Olivia, your lineage, the serum. I thought that I was protecting you by keeping the truth from you, but it turned out to put you in more danger in the long run." As Edric spoke, I shook my head and looked up at him. "I know you're going to tell me that it's not my fault," he said before I could say anything. He sat up then and swung his legs over the bed, standing and walking over to the closet. "But it is. All along, I've been hiding so much from both you and Ella. It's time that the truth comes out." Edric began to rifle through his closet as he spoke. I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp to see him coming back with a shoebox in his hands. "Let me tell you what really happened with Olivia," he said. He set the box down, then sighed and passed his hand over his tired face. "She's a liar. I'm sorry that she manipulated you. There was a point in time when she manipulated me too. She had me convinced that we would live a happy life together and that she loved me. I knew that she wasn't my fated mate, but I didn't care. When she got pregnant, I was overjoyed. And when Ella was born, and I held my little girl for the first time, I knew that Olivia was brought into my life specifically to bring Ella into the world. But things got bad after that." He opened the shoebox to reveal what looked like a bundle of letters folded up, and started to pull them out. There weren't just letters inside, I realized. There were photos, too. Photos of Olivia with other men, photos of her passed out on the floor, photos taken through windows of her screaming at Edric and pointing her finger in his face. "What is all of this?" I whispered. Edric shook his head grimly and swallowed. As soon as Ella was born, Olivia changed. The doctors told me that it was postpartum depression, but it never got better. Months went by and she just got worse. She started drinking and taking drugs, and I found her with other men on multiple occasions. I finally hired a private investigator to get all of this evidence so that I could win the custody battle for Ella, because I realized that Olivia was dangerous. But the thing is, during the custody battle, she didn't even try to keep Ella. She only ever wanted the money. Ella was just a means to an end for her. So I gave her the money that she wanted, under the sole condition that she stay out of Ella's life forever. I told Ella that her mother died because I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. My eyes widened as Edric told me his story. What Olivia had told me was so different, how she had fought so hard for her baby, and Edric stole her. But now, Edric's side of the story painted Olivia out to be a horrible mother, and he had evidence to prove it. "Every year, Olivia starts up with trying to get more money out of me," Edric continued. "That's why she calls nonstop around Ella's birthday. She uses it as an excuse and tries to pretend like she's just calling to check on Ella or send gifts, but that's not the case. She's just begging for more money to fuel her lavish lifestyle, and I stupidly give it to her so she won't tell anyone the truth about Ella." I didn't realize it at first, but as Edric spoke, I was slowly standing, and now I was standing in front of him. Without a word, I put my arms around him and hugged him tightly. He stiffened for a moment before relaxing and wrapping his arms around me, and I felt his chin rest on top of my head. We held each other like that for a long time, neither of us speaking. I felt like such a jerk for listening to Olivia over him. I should have just talked to him. But now I knew that I wouldn't do anything like that ever again. Edric was a good father who cared about Ella, who cared about our baby, who cared about me. Finally, when we pulled away, I looked up to meet Edric's gaze. "I think you should tell Ella the truth," I whispered. "I think it's time." Edric. Moana was right about the fact that I needed to tell Ella the truth about her mother. It was time that Ella knew what her mother was really like, especially after that whole ordeal. But at that moment, although I promised Moana that I would tell Ella about Olivia soon, I had more pressing matters to deal with. First thing in the morning, I took Moana to the doctor's office for a full checkup to make sure that both she and the baby were healthy. Thankfully, they were. The baby was as healthy as an ox. In fact, when Moana was being strangled by Ethan, I remembered seeing her suddenly overcome with a burst of light that launched Ethan backwards. I didn't know if it was the baby or Moana's own abilities that protected her at that moment, but it didn't matter. All I knew was that that burst of light saved Moana from being strangled to death by Ethan when I was still too weak to move. However, as the day went on, it quickly came to my attention that the whole ordeal had already made its way to the news. Somehow, those damn paparazzi got footage of Ethan being escorted into the cop car and Moana's terrified face. Those clips were already circulating various news outlets with all sorts of speculations on what happened. I didn't know if I would bother having a press conference about it, though. At that moment, I just wanted to get Moana and Ella away from the city. The last time we had gone to the mountain estate, it had gone poorly. My father had sent a hired rogue to intimidate us, and we had left abruptly, as we no longer felt safe there. And I supposed that we could easily run into trouble again if we went back, but the city was just too dangerous right now. There was a good chance that Moana could shift at any moment now that her wolf had emerged, and I wanted her to be out of the city for 2 reasons. For starters, a wolf shifting for the first time would be dangerous in an enclosed space like the penthouse, especially since she didn't know how to control it yet. And secondly, if Moana shifted, her scent would permeate throughout the entire city, which would no doubt draw all sorts of sick people to us. If I wanted to keep her safe, I needed to get her somewhere where it would be unlikely for others to be close enough to pick up her scent. And so, that weekend, I worked tirelessly to hire an entire team of security guards. I hired over 20 new guards, all of whom were the best of the best. They were all alphas with extensive combat experience, and I vetted them thoroughly to make sure that they wouldn't turn on us if Moana turned. I paid them well, too. I didn't care how much it cost so long as Moana and Ella were safe. On Sunday evening, I finally finished my preparations. All that was left was to tell Moana that we would be leaving first thing in the morning. I knew that she wouldn't take it well. "We're what?" Moana asked, standing up suddenly from the armchair by the window. "Tomorrow?" I nodded grimly, trying not to pay any attention to the incredulous look on her face. "I'm sorry," I said. "We'll be staying until the baby is born. Potentially longer than that if I still think it's unsafe for you in the city." Moana shook her head vigorously and frowned deeply. "We can't leave," she pleaded as she stormed up to me and grabbed my arm. "What about my teaching job? What about Ella's new school? You can't take that from her." Seeing the look on her face made me feel sad. I knew how much she loved that job, but it just wasn't safe in the city. Until she shifted and until the baby was born, I wouldn't feel comfortable bringing them back here. And besides, my father was still a threat. He would find out about Moana's true nature eventually, and I wouldn't have been surprised if he was the very first person to try to hunt her down. He had too much at stake as one of the wealthiest and most corrupt men in the world to let the Golden Wolf bring a new era in which humans and werewolves could live in harmony. He had built his entire empire off of the backs of underpaid and overworked humans. "Moana, I'm really sorry," I finally said. "I promise we'll come back." I know you love your job, and we'll find a substitute to fill in for you until we come back. You can claim it as maternity leave. You can tell them that you're having complications with the pregnancy. The headmistress will understand and will certainly give you the job back once we return." Moana's eyes were full of pain. She looked as though she was about to say something, but apparently decided against it and just walked away. She walked over to the window and looked out, folding her arms across her chest. "I think we're safer here." Her voice was low, so low it was almost a whisper. "This is our home." Her words created a pang in my heart, but the preparations had already been made. The mountain estate would be the safest option during that time. I not only needed to make sure that Moana was safe until she had the baby, but I also needed to figure out how Moana would continue to be safe as the golden wolf. Without the help of the mother witch, I felt lost and clueless. The mother witch knew what would need to be done, and I hardly knew anything about the golden wolf, aside from the fairy tales I was told as a kid. "I know this is our home," I finally said, walking up to stand beside her. We looked out the window at the bustling city for a few moments. Below us, there was a throng of paparazzi waiting outside the penthouse like hungry sharks. They had been camping out there all day and would likely be camping out there for several days on end, just hoping for us to come outside so they could bombard us with photos and questions. I gestured to them, then looked over at Moana. She shot me an angry but still understanding look. "Just look at them," I said. "We can't be here with them out there like that. Imagine what it will be like when they find out that you're the golden wolf." Moana chuckled slightly as she watched the mob mill about outside like zombies. "I guess you're right," she said quietly. "They're like piranhas." I turned to face her then and took both of her shoulders in my hands. I stared sternly into her eyes, hoping that she would see my sense of urgency. "The poachers and bounty hunters will be worse?" I whispered, taking note of the way that her green eyes widened. "I'm only doing this to keep you safe. I hope you know that." Moana looked up at me for a few moments, chewing the inside of her cheek before she finally nodded. "I understand," she replied, "so long as you promise that we'll come home soon." Edric. Moana was terribly quiet for the next few days. I didn't blame her, of course. She was going to be rightfully upset about having to leave, but it was the safest thing to be done. I only ever wanted to keep Moana and Ella safe, and despite our last incident at the mountain estate, I felt confident that our new security guards would protect us while we were there. During that time, though, I decided that I would have to figure out what to do about my father. I knew that he was going to come after us, but I had no real evidence. He hadn't made any real threats yet, at least not anything that we could prove, so we couldn't turn him in to the police. As of that moment, I was at a loss as to what to do about him, and my mother wasn't picking up her phone when I called either. I was beginning to get worried, to say the least. The next few days went by too quickly. I hired a moving company to get everything that we would need, mostly clothes, kitchenware, and sentimental items, since the mountain estate was already fully furnished. I wanted Moana to feel at home there, so without her knowledge, I hired an interior designer to go to the estate and furnish one of the rooms to make it a nice art studio for her. I figured that this would cheer Moana up and maybe make her not hate being there and being away from her job so much. By the middle of the week, however, I started to feel a bit sad too. I liked the penthouse. I had never really cared too much about the place, but ever since Moana had begun to call the penthouse her home, it had become more special to me. What was once just an expensive and luxurious place to live now felt entirely different. As we went around and prepared to move, I began to notice little things that I hadn't noticed before, too. Moana had placed flowers around the apartment. She had left various throw blankets and comfortable pillows on the furniture. Her sketchbook lay on the table by the armchair in the sun. Even in my bedroom, she had placed a little dish for her jewelry and a stack of books on the bedside table, and had a tray of lotions and serums for her skin and hair on the bathroom sink. I used to keep my bedroom curtains closed, as I needed complete darkness to try to sleep, but lately they had been open and my bedroom was filled with sunlight during the afternoons. I hadn't noticed, but apparently at one point, Moana had replaced the boring black comforter on my bed with a lighter-colored one that brightened up the room. Seeing all of this now, I felt more reluctant to leave. I knew that we had to go, but it was so hard to say goodbye to this place. Ella was distraught, too. When I initially told her about my plans to take them to the mountain estate, she had thrown a massive fit. She didn't remember anything about the event in the warehouse, so she really didn't understand why I was making them move, and she was furious with me. She spent the next few days fuming at me and refusing to speak because she didn't want to leave her new friends that she had made at school. By the end of the week, however, it was time to leave. The movers were scheduled to come at noon, and once they had packed up all of our things, they would be following us to the mountain estate along with our caravan of security vans. We would be leaving out the back, where the paparazzi weren't waiting for us. Within a couple of weeks, news would probably start to spread that the Morgan penthouse was dark and empty, which would likely stir up a lot of news since Ethan was being held in jail. I didn't care, though. I just wanted to get out. Friday morning, I woke up and finished packing up a few things. Moana eventually came out and helped Ella get ready, but she hardly spoke to me. Oh well, I thought to myself. She would come around soon. Soon, she would understand why I was doing this, and she wouldn't be so mad at me. And besides, the mountain estate was beautiful. For all I knew, she might even want to stay there. Maybe eventually we would sell the penthouse, send Ella to a private school near the mountain estate, and I would manage WearCorp remotely. I wouldn't mind that. I was passing through the living room at one point with a box in my hand, however, when something caught my eye. The piano. I stopped and looked at it for a few moments. This past week, I hadn't been playing it much, but now, in the late morning sunlight, it looked tempting. So setting the box down on the floor, I decided to sit at the piano and play one last song before we left. At first, I played quietly and tentatively. I hated being overheard, as having an audience made me oddly nervous. Despite my public speaking abilities, I couldn't stand playing the piano in front of people. But as I played a little more, I soon got lost in the song. I started playing more fluidly, closing my eyes as I felt the smooth keys beneath my fingers. I stopped caring if anyone overheard me and simply felt the music move through me. I didn't know how long I played for. It could have been minutes or even hours. All I knew was that when I opened my eyes, I wasn't alone anymore. She was standing by the window looking out at the city. The sunlight streamed in and illuminated her red hair like fire. She was wearing a light, loose dress. I never would have admitted it, but I couldn't help but notice that I could see the outline of her shapely body as the sunlight shined through her dress, and was holding her belly with one hand and rubbing it with the other. Lately, her belly had been growing larger. It was much harder to hide it now that she was a few months along, and werewolf babies were notorious for growing a little faster than human babies. Seeing the protrusion of her round, full belly beneath her dress made me smile just a little bit. She slowly turned to look at me, noticing that I had stopped playing. There were tears in her beautiful green eyes, although she still held her head high, just like she always did. Flashes of the way that she held herself together, even when my brother had her at gunpoint, floated through my mind as I looked at her. For a long time, Moana and I just looked at each other without a single word said between us. During those moments, everything that I had made up my mind about that past week was instantly torn away. As I looked at Moana, seeing how beautiful she looked in the sunlight and the way that the tears in her emerald eyes just made them sparkle even more, I knew that I couldn't leave this place. This was our home, Moana. Leaving the penthouse broke my heart. That place had become my home. It was our home. I didn't want to leave, and neither did Ella. I didn't think that Edric even wanted to leave either. He kept telling me that it was for the best, that it would be safer at the mountain estate. I wanted to believe him, but part of me didn't think that the mountain estate was all that much safer at all. The last time we had been there, we were almost attacked by a rogue in its wolf form. Even with all of the security guards that Edric hired, I still didn't think that we were safe. However, I tried to be understanding, so I didn't complain too much. No matter how much Ella's sadness over leaving her new friends that she made at school made me want to try, I needed to hold my head up. If Edric thought that it would be better off for everyone if we went to the mountain estate, then I would listen to him. He hadn't failed me before. As the days went on, I found it harder and harder to pack up my sentimental things. My room felt empty after packing up all of my clothes and my books and art supplies, and Ella's room felt even more empty with her toys packed away. She insisted on keeping her stuffed duck, the one that I had bought for her at the farmer's market over the summer, out for the car ride. Other than that, everything went into boxes for the movers to pick up. By Friday morning, the day that we were supposed to leave, everything really did feel empty. As I walked around and checked to make sure that I had everything I wanted for the next 7 or more months that we would be living at the mountain estate, I had to blink back tears on multiple occasions. It's only going to be a few months, I told myself, as though that would comfort me. We'll be back in a few months. That's all. But I didn't think that it was only going to be a few months in reality. One day that week, I had walked past Edric while he was using his phone, and I saw that he was looking at realtors online. He was thinking about selling the penthouse. I decided not to say anything, but the thought of it broke my heart. As I walked around, I noticed that I had left a few things in my closet that I would want to bring. Sighing, I stooped down to pick up the pile of clothes that had been lost at the back of my closet, and as I did, something came to my ears. Edric was playing the piano. It was a sad, sweet song, one of my favorites, actually. The high notes mixed with the severity of the lower keys made for a melancholy tune, which fit the day perfectly. I quickly forgot the things that I had in my hand and walked out toward the sound, almost as though I was in a trance. As I approached, Edric didn't seem to notice me. He had his eyes closed and appeared to be completely absorbed in the music. He looked so handsome playing the piano in the sunlight with his sleeves rolled up to his elbows and his dark hair a little messy. Smiling slightly, I quietly walked over to the window and looked out while he played on the off chance that he opened his eyes and saw me there. Last time he had played, he didn't want me to look at him. Even though I wanted a snapshot in my mind of the way that he looked just then, I decided to look out at the city instead. Eventually, the song came to an end and the air in the penthouse fell silent. I felt Edric's eyes on me, and so I slowly turned. There were tears in my eyes, but I didn't bother to blink them away that time. For several long moments, we just stared at each other without a word. Edric's face seemed to soften, and something unrecognizable flashed through his eyes before he stood and slowly walked over to me. His shoes echoed against the wood floor. When he stopped in front of me, the air between us was almost static. I felt his hand come down and press against mine, against my belly. He held it there firmly so that I could feel his warmth. I tilted my head back to look up at him, and as I did, he bent down and gently pressed his lips against mine. His lips were warm and soft and filled me with a sense of peace. Our kiss was long and sweet. When we finally pulled away, it was reluctant, and our lips parted from each other with a gentle smacking sound. For a few more moments, Edric touched his forehead to mine before raising his free hand and tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "We're staying," he whispered. My eyes widened. I took a step back, half expecting him to be joking, but he wasn't. His eyes showed nothing but sincerity. "Really?" I said. Edric nodded. "This is our home," he said. "I can't make us leave." I couldn't contain my excitement. Without thinking, I let out an excited laugh and threw my arms around him. I kissed him again, more deeply and fervently this time, and when I pulled away, my face was red with embarrassment. But Edric just smiled at me and held me tightly with his eyes full of love. Suddenly, I heard Ella's little voice call out from the doorway. "We're staying?" she asked. Edric and I both nodded, and while a squeal of happiness, she ran over to us. Edric scooped her up and held her between us. I felt like a little family, a real one this time, and Edric was right. This was our home. I still didn't know what the future held for us now, even though I had marked Edric, but I was excited about it. I was happy to call him my mate and to be able to share this life together, even if this life was out of the ordinary. No matter what came our way, I knew that we could tackle it together. I wasn't afraid, so long as I had Edric by my side. But at the same time, there was still so much at stake. With my wolf having emerged, I could shift at any time. Not only could the first shifting process be dangerous for our baby in and of itself, but it would also cause my scent to permeate the city, which could lead bounty hunters to us. And one of those hunters was, without a doubt, Edric's father. With Kelly and Ethan both in jail, they were no longer a threat. But all along, I was certain that Michael was plotting something. Perhaps he already knew that I was the Golden Wolf, and he would come for me soon. I had no way of knowing what would happen next, but I did know one thing for certain. With Edric by my side, everything would be okay.